The incredible spires of the remarkable city of Prague in the Czech Republic, in Central Europe. A city that's seen, no doubt, many different days. And what exactly has this city seen? What's the history of these incredible structures with their fine geometric precision, their artistry and craftsmanship displayed on every single structure? What has this city seen, and what does it really tell us about the passage of time? What's the actual age of this city? Is it hundreds of years, thousands of years, more, less? We have an official history behind it. We even have an incredible astronomical clock from the Middle Ages, one of the great features. Join me as we explore 1,000 Lost Years. To understand exactly what we have in our past, though, we have to look at how we look at history. It's very important. And you may recall that we oftentimes debate about who's actually responsible for recording history. I mean, historians don't actually record history. They read past history and they interpret it. They give us the current accepted standard, which is known as official history. Although many, and in the comments section, have indicated that journalists record history, such as Ida M. Tarbell, a known muckraker. And granted, we don't have Ida M. Tarbell anymore, a reliable journalist. We have modern journalists. And it should be noted that current mainstream historians recognize that mainstream journalists don't always tell the truth, for a variety of reasons. What's the difference between historical revisionism and negationism? Is it where we just throw away books? Well, we have an official definition for it. We even have a way in which it applies to all of us. And we'll go through it because it's important to understand. Historical negationism, otherwise known as historical revisionism, first coined by Henry Rousseau as a term to describe the denial of the Holocaust. This brief uses the term historical negationism instead of revisionism for the same reason Rousseau coined it, to avoid confusing denial with legitimate, scholarly revision of contemporary understanding of history, as might happen when researchers discover new sources. So yes, it's that historical revisionism. Round and round he goes, where he ends up, no one knows. And that's exactly how it feels. Why are things always changing? What is real history? The history of negative expressions in various languages makes us witness the following curious fluctuation. The original negative adverb is first weakened, then found insufficient. And it's important to understand words and perceptions. Oddly enough, this is written by Otto Jespersen, Negation in English and Other Languages. In other words, the meaning of words themselves can be subverted, changed, and altered, and then suddenly we have the same development as the original word. So what are we really getting at? Is it very confusing? Is it difficult to know exactly when history really transpired and when we've changed and altered it? How exactly do we understand that we have 1,000 lost years, and what exactly do we mean by that? Is it just that we had 1,000 years where we didn't record history? Or are the previous 1,000 years themselves lost and subject to question? Well, if you actually look at what mainstream history tells you, it is very clear that we have a definitive written record of history, and that there are no questions or concerns about it. There is no reason why we should believe that the history that we agree upon, did we agree upon it, is the official history. And certainly people who ask questions are people who may be perceived as troublemakers. Now, imagine with me, if you will, a new development in civilization. Let's say 30 years from now, we have an entirely different civilization that develops. A new society that has different symbols, different manners of dress. In fact, entirely different social mores. For example, if you went back 100 years to the year we think of as 1923, then what exactly would you say? What would be the difference between what you see in 1923 and 2025? And of course, I avoid using the even 100 years because that's just too easy to do. Is there a reason why we always affiliate with 1,000 years? And what role do scientists and historians play in understanding what really happened, and the difference between a conspiracy and a conspiracy theory? Here we have the great Carl Sagan himself, identified as an incredible astronomer and a wonderful science communicator. And it should be noted that Carl Sagan was very adept at speaking in terms that everyone could understand. That's why he was considered a great communicator. Although there are some historians who say that his knowledge and use of history wasn't exactly, well, how shall we say, accurate. But he certainly knew about the planets, even if he never actually went to space. He didn't need to, he was that intelligent. Much in the same way that historian Mary Beard, who I acknowledge is probably one of the finest writers you would ever hope to read because her writing skills are incredibly detailed. And she's able to lay out many wonderful ideas and defend them with various forms of historical understanding, and citing the writings of the actual historians of the Roman Empire. What's intriguing, though, is that, much like Carl Sagan never went to space, and yet is an expert astronomer, Mary Beard is an expert in Roman history, though she never lived a single day in Rome and never talked to an actual Roman citizen. Now let's take this idea to a different place. Arthur C. Clarke, a science fiction author. Now, of course, you're saying, a science fiction author, what would he have to do with anything legitimate such as science or history? Well, it's intriguing to note that Arthur C. Clarke was considered a proponent for space travel. He wrote about space travel. Now, of course, you'll say it was merely speculative fiction, what would be termed science fiction. But another peculiar detail about Arthur C. Clarke, he knew a lot about space travel, or he could imagine it, but he never actually went to space. And I certainly acknowledge that many of his novels are very well written. So what do we have here? We have a model suggested by journalists and politicians to explain conspiracy theories. Social media and exposure to conspiracy theories, belief in conspiracy theories. And from journalists and politicians, it leads to illegal and dangerous behavior. And of course, it's in red, to make sure that you know it is not advisable. Now, what exactly is the model suggested by empirical social scientific evidence? That just rolls right off the tongue, doesn't it? Where do the beliefs in conspiracy theories actually come from? Well, according to empirical social behavior, it's psychological motivations, political motivations, social motivations. And what exactly do those lead to? And remember, this is the official model, the same thing, illegal and dangerous behavior. So whether it's politicians, journalists, scientists, or historians analyzing it, they say it all leads to the same thing. Thinking for yourself can lead to illegal and dangerous behavior. So you've got to be very, very careful. There were also governments that engaged in it, such as the former Soviet Union. In this famous picture with Stalin, he must have had very cold hands, therefore he had to keep them warm, where we had the unfortunate individual who was completely removed from the photo. And it should be noted that this process, this, how shall we say, historical denial that transpired, is well documented and did occur. It's an example of a government, a nation state, that is engaging in, how shall we say, unscrupulous historical practices. And as a result, the official historical account becomes very obscured. Of course, we're well aware of this. Now let's take a science fiction example, the story of Dune and the character of Duncan Idaho. Duncan Idaho portrayed by actor Richard Jordan. Now, if you're familiar with David Lynch's 1984 Dune, and of course the novel by Frank Herbert, you understand that Duncan Idaho ends up playing a very critical role in the story. And I know what you're saying if you only saw the movie. Wait a minute, he died. That was the end of it, right? Well, if you're familiar with it, no, Duncan Idaho is revived. He's actually cloned and goes through a series of transitions. What are those series of transitions, and what's it really come to in the story of Dune? Duncan Idaho is a very critical character who begins to understand that the flow of history, of course this is in the Dune novels, is not exactly as is intended, that human beings have some sort of destiny. What's intriguing, though, is to think of the Jason Momoa Duncan Idaho and compare and contrast him with the Richard Jordan Duncan Idaho. They're both very intriguing characters, and I'll give Jason Momoa credit, he definitely displayed by far the most humanity in the current Dune film, in my humble opinion. Obviously, there were many deleted scenes and footage we'll never see of Richard Jordan as Duncan Idaho. I wish we could have seen the films that David Lynch wanted to make to tell the rest of the Dune story. It would have been very intriguing seeing Frank Herbert in that role, and gaining that understanding of what history really means, and how it's influencing humanity. Now back to the topic of denialism. There's an official denial that occurred in the 1950s with the rhetoric from President Dwight D. Eisenhower. During the time of the 1950s, the United States realized that they needed a rearmed Western Germany. And so as a result of this, Eisenhower softened a lot of the speeches that he made, condemning former members of the German military in World War II for the heinous acts that official history says that they committed during World War II. And as a result of this created what was called the myth of the clean German armed forces in World War II. Here's an interesting image. We have the soldiers of West Germany on the march. And yes, these are actually German soldiers, the new Bundeswehr, the German Defense Force of West Germany, and they're very obvious in American equipment. I bet they never thought that they were going to be marching or carrying weapons again. Look like a very eager bunch, don't they? It's an intriguing thought, though. And what prompted this? Well, at the time, with the Cold War on the rise, it was assessed that the NATO armies fielded needed more of a boost to actually stand against the terrifying legions of the Soviet Union. And therefore, a rearmed West Germany was the only solution imagined at that time. It was a very controversial move. And yet there was a practical reason behind it. Yes, the German army using surplus U.S. equipment. And keep in mind that during World War II, the United States provided more ammunition for the armed forces of the Soviet Union, the Red Army, than it did for its own military. How fascinating. Yes, those American surplus tanks, not the venerable great Leopard 2 tanks that the German army would be well known for. But it's very intriguing thinking of this development. Also, it's interesting to note that during the administration of Dwight D. Eisenhower, he favored what was called massive retaliation. That's massive nuclear retaliation. In fact, the United States Army during the 1950s didn't favor its infantry or armor formations, what is today called maneuver warfare. But they actually favored air defense, artillery, as the foremost branch. How different things were in the 1950s. Well, if they were going to rearm West Germany, then guess what that meant? Oh, that's a very nice and intriguing building there. During the political times, it meant that East Germany had to be rearmed by the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union didn't hesitate to do that, despite the fact that Germany was their mortal enemy and had created so much damage in their homeland. Well, that Russian officer looks particularly happy that he actually has Germans that are now fighting for him, or fighting for his side, I should say. And look at these East German soldiers. Don't they look like they're just having a grand old time? As though they never thought they were going to get out to the range again. And here they are with big smiles on their faces. And so what do we really have? The first step to prevent conspiracy theories is to know that they exist. Be aware and stop the spread. And how exactly is this supposed to be done? And who published this? What are they? The belief that events are secretly manipulated behind the scenes by powerful forces with negative intent. Nobody manipulates events behind the scenes, right? Conspiracy theories have 6 things in common: an alleged secret plot, a group of conspirators, old admirals in Starfleet, evidence that seems to support the conspiracy theory, they divide the world into good and bad, they scapegoat people and groups. Why do they flourish? They offer an explanation of events or situations which are difficult to understand. The need is heightened in times of uncertainty, like any sort of health emergency, war, or even when you can't watch your favorite sporting team. How do they take root? They start as suspicion. And then, of course, anybody can't stop conspiracy theories. And why do people spread them? Most believe they're true. And this is from our friends at the European Commission. So be sure that you keep your eyes open for conspiracy theories, because the European Commission doesn't want people thinking for themselves, or they're concerned about it. Kind of goes back to this particular, hey, who is this guy? Oh, it's Indiana Jones. I didn't recognize him without the hat, the jacket, and the whip. And he said, nothing shocks me. I'm a scientist. And nothing shocks me either, including Indiana Heston. This is Anatoly Fomenko, and he is known for positing a theory that there's over 1,000 lost years in history. And we had to understand that concept of historical revision and negation because currently, Mr. Fomenko here is considered a negationist, a denier. He is not a mainstream historian. He is a mathematician who's indulged in what are termed pseudo-historical theories. But there's an interesting idea that he brings about. What if the last 1,000 years didn't happen? What about the history of the Middle Ages? Should his writings be read? And of course, if you go off of the European Commission and if you go off of official history, absolutely not. But there's something even more interesting when we look at the mainstream view of history. This is the cosmic calendar, featured by scientist Carl Sagan in the TV series Cosmos, which he hosted and narrated. And one of the things he posited was there were billions of years of history. And yet, despite the fact that there are billions of years of history represented by these calendar months, that human history was only in the very last day, last week, or even the last 12 minutes of the last day. In other words, there are billions of years of lost history. And why is that? Because there were no humans to record it. There weren't even any journalists to write about that evolution. When humans evolved. Where were the journalists to write about it? And we have all of these incredible, majestic structures. We have structures that you can actually go and see wherever you are in the land. And we have numerous pictures of very bizarre and exotic structures in unique and random locations. Now, of course, we always have to take every single image that we see with a grain of salt, knowing that in this present era, although this is not a recent development, there exists the technology to create images, and there exists the technology to alter existing images. So you have to be careful. Is this a legitimate image that you're looking at here? Is this some kind of very, very old building where the builders apparently engaged in some unknown purpose for this device at the top? And why does it have tree branches coming out of it? Well, in addition to being artisans, they were also lovers of nature. Now, let's go back and look at the whole concept of the bastion fort, also known as the star fort or the geometrically precise foundation structure. And here we're looking at the layout and the plan of Fort Duquesne, or Pittsburgh, or whatever you want to actually call it, back during the time of the 7 Years' War, or the French Indian War, as they called it, in what would become the United States. And the explanation behind these elaborate and very beautiful bastion forts is that they were constructed for military purposes. Yes, these beautiful structures that had wonderful and incredible aesthetics to them were designed for military purposes. We even have numerous entire cities that are laid out in the same fashion. Now, this is something that we really should question, because if these were constructed for simple military purposes, then why would there be such an effort put into making them so aesthetically pleasing, into being so geometrically precise? And then even the gateways and the entryways have a very interesting and artistic layout of portals and doorways. What exact military purpose does this particular doorway serve? Well, you see, those mighty cannons couldn't blast their way through it. These structures were cannon-proof, and they also provided incredible defenses against cannon attack. And then you have these numerous walls, whether they're called Venetian walls, Aurelian walls, wonderful fortification walls. Now, a question I have for you is, how difficult would it be for us to construct such walls today? How much difficult would it be for us to build walls with bigger blocks? Yes, let's see what the military experts actually say about fixed fortifications or bastion forts. Here's one of the foremost experts, George S. Patton, a master in maneuver warfare from the United States Army. And I'll say it in his high-pitched voice: fixed fortifications are a monument to the stupidity of man. Wait a minute, what's that you're saying? George S. Patton had a high-pitched voice? Yes, actually he did. But we oftentimes confuse with actor George C. Scott, the Missourian, and his gravelly voice. Fixed fortifications are a monument to the stupidity of man. Isn't it interesting to think about that perception? Now, no one did that intentionally. Patton was a great movie from 1970. And it was during a time when the United States military was going through, well, just a lot of criticism. What about these current areas that we see that are dugout berms? This is done by a D7 dozer. Did some charlatan sell to all these lords of the Middle Ages that they could build these bastion forts utilizing labor and tying up very essential resources for years? Or is there some other explanation behind the bastion forts? Here you have the classic mass-produced World War II barracks by the United States. And remember, we're well aware of the achievements of the United States during World War II. Well, these were structures that they rapidly built so soldiers would have a roof over their head when they were training. And then let's not forget that the United States is also the same nation that completed the incredible construction feat of building 24 fleet carriers, or Essex-class carriers. Prior to World War II, the Royal Navy of the United Kingdom was considered the greatest navy in the land. But after World War II, it would be the United States Navy, with its now currently called carrier strike groups. So what's really the truth then behind this incredible history that we have? What actually happened? Were there really incredible forts and fortifications that there were no means to destroy during the Middle Ages and the late Renaissance and up to the 1700s? Or is there an entirely different explanation for it? Even looking at the grand history of the so-called cosmos, the theory being that everything originates from a single point known as the Big Bang. It's a theory, although I would say if someone presented a theory as a fact, that might be disingenuous. That if they said something that was a theory was a fact, might be engaging in some form of, dare I say, denialism? I guess you could call it revision, but, we have different experts for different things. Scientists can tell you what happened scientifically, and historians actually tell you what happened in the past. What exactly does this picture represent, and who is this individual? Quite an interesting head that they have. And what happened after the fall of the Roman Empire? We have Clovis, king of the Franks, in 481. We don't even mention that terrible year 536 in this timeline. The Battle of Tours, which prevented the spread of Islam into Europe. So the official history says, although revisionist history says it was merely a raid and the battle wasn't all that decisive. The reign of Charlemagne, Charles the Great, the Holy Roman Emperor of the Carolingian Empire. And then 832, the Vikings invade. And that's about all you really need to know. Which Vikings are we talking about? Are we talking about the Lee Majors Vikings, or are we talking about the more current Vikings who have the shaved head? And the rule of Charlemagne was something that always interested me. Yes, here we have this image of Charlemagne where he kind of looks like Santa Claus with a very elaborate crown on his head. But even questioning the existence of Charlemagne is something that'll only get you in a lot of trouble. It's very clear that Charlemagne, or Charles the Great, yes, we go back and forth on how to actually say the name, because is it the Gaelic version of Charles? Is it the French version of Charles? Is it the English version of Charles? By the way, did they ever actually call it the Carolingian Empire, or was that a name that we assigned later? And now you start to see the issue that we have with our understanding of history. There's so many times that we assign terms later, after the fact, that we don't seem to have an actual understanding. And so, if we're referring to something as the Byzantine Empire, even though that empire did not call themselves the Byzantine Empire, then is that legitimate history? Or is that, how shall we say, a historical assignment? Are we not being true to the understanding of history? And that's really the question I want to pose. If we have an entire empire that existed for 1,000 years, and we're giving it the wrong name, then is that not the very beginning of losing 1,000 years? Because what name did they actually call it? And what's the truth behind the Holy Roman Empire? A Holy Roman Empire that didn't actually have anything to do with Rome. It was actually what would become the nation-state of Germany later. Why did they have the two-headed eagle? What exactly did it represent? Why would a nation adopt anything with a two-headed anything? It's very odd. There's the reference to the Western and the Eastern Roman Empire. The Eastern Roman Empire would survive. The Western Roman Empire was sacked and fell. The last Roman emperor in the Western Roman Empire, Romulus Augustus, and the Eastern Roman Empire enduring, as we call the Byzantine Empire. And whatever happened to the Huns? Well, they just kind of broke up and stopped doing their raids. You can even look in later eras of history, such as the rule of Otto the Great, and one of the founding powers of the Holy Roman Empire. And here you'll see that he's titled Otto Rex, or Otto Rex, King Otto. Quite elaborate headdress. And here we have this little relief, if you will, of Otto presenting a castle, a church, a cathedral to Jesus Christ himself. And Otto is depicted in a very, very small format because it's to show humility in the presence of Jesus and the saints. Well, how very pious of him. There's other historical questions that we have, though, such as the existence of figures like Joan of Arc. Now, I remember when I was teaching medieval history, there was quite an argument amongst the professors. Nobody argued if Joan of Arc existed, of course, but the role that she actually played in turning the tide for the 100 Years' War with France against England. Was Joan of Arc a general, a commander for the French army, or was she merely a standard bearer? In all the depictions, she's always armed, which is quite fascinating, although you could make the argument that a standard bearer needs to be armed. You can't have the enemy capturing the standard. But it's yet another example of a woman taking a leadership role and being remembered by history. And there are many other examples. Irene, Elizabeth, and the names go on and on. It seems to run counter to what our understanding was of the stated historical role of women in history. And so it creates a lot of questions. I mean, what exactly is the role of these interesting hats that these individuals are wearing? And what is the truth behind the bubonic plague? We're to understand that nearly half the population of Europe perished in a very short amount of time, that the reason that this plague was so devastating was that prior to the plague, the nations of Europe were experiencing a famine. And so they were already weakened by famine, and then the plague destroyed many others. Is that what happened? Or is it merely an explanation for a different series of events? The challenge that we have is that there is no one that we can actually talk to who experienced these events. We have to trust, and it doesn't matter what your view is on history, whether you're Mary Beard, Carl Sagan, or Lucius Aurelian, or whoever, we have to trust those who recorded it, and trust that they recorded it properly. Not only that, but we also have to trust the chain of custody with the recorded documents. We have to trust the fact that when they were translated from different languages between different nations, different empires, that they were recorded properly. Why do we have a catacomb of so many bones below Paris, France? How many bones of how many individuals are down there? Millions? I suppose it depends on who you ask. And where did these bones come from? Why would these bones be arranged in this format? How exactly does this reflect the values at the time of Christianity, which was the only known religion in Europe at the time? Although there were others, such as the Gnostics, but the Gnostics were completely destroyed during the so-called Albigensian Crusades. Are all these structures exactly constructed in the way that we think that they are? Some with construction timelines of hundreds of years? And by the way, does anybody know what structure in the United States where you see this same geometric precision that you see on the ceiling of this incredible cathedral? And I'll give you a hint, it's not a cathedral in the United States. It has a very different purpose. And yet you'll find many structures that reflect this geometric precision. What's really the truth behind this rule that we have of all these kings and queens and all the concepts of feudalism? And the other question I have that we should consider is, why is it that we put such priority on the royalty, but who else do we remember? For example, we have very well-tracked lineages, very well-tracked family trees. Is it a coincidence then that in many of our high fantasy novels, you'll also see family trees and lineages? And do we actually have legitimate lineages of family names for commoners, for peasants, which as we understand it, was essentially 99% of the population in Europe, those who worked the land, or the serfs, or the lower class? So why exactly would we have a very profound and accurate family record? I mean, they were just part of the resources tied to the land. Yes, it was a form of forced labor. But if you were just barely being able to make ends meet with producing food, then how could you reassign half the population to construct these elaborate bastion forts? How would they even have the knowledge to construct them? You might have an engineer such as Balian of Ibelin on hand, who looks a lot like Orlando Bloom, but you just wouldn't have the actual manpower to construct these structures. And what's the reality behind the Byzantine Empire? Did Justinian really exist in the way that we think that he did? Is this what he looked like? And what about his general who was forgotten, Belisarius? Is this what he looked like? We don't know for sure if this is Belisarius. Or is it Belrios? If anybody gets that reference, let me know. And of course, even the existence of Otto Rex, the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. Well, we have a coin of him, so he must have existed, right? What exactly is going on with his face when you look closely at this coin? I don't know, maybe it's just eroded to the forces of time. But we look at all of these incredible family trees and these records and these lineages that we have. And it becomes a lot easier to have a royal family assigned for each nation. I mean, a royal family that's recorded and tracked for each nation. But what about the rest of the population? For example, on my mother's side, we can trace our family name all the way back to the 1400s. But the only thing we have is just a list of names and dates. We don't have exact locations where they lived, and we certainly don't know what their deeds were, their professions, or any other details about their life. It's very peculiar. So what really was going on in this last 1,000 years? Is it exactly as history tracked it? Or are there a few things that aren't exactly as we'd have them believe. Not because there's a conspiracy, not because anyone's trying to mislead anyone, but simply because along the way, perhaps some unscrupulous power changed the records. I mean, it is well documented that we have corrupt governments that would do that. Not our current governments, of course, but governments in the past. And what's the reality behind this incredible crown of the Holy Roman Emperor? I remember when I first saw it and I made an offhand comment that it kind of reminded me of that crown I could snag at Burger King back in the day. This was a long time ago, but I don't know. What are your thoughts on this? Did we lose 1,000 years, or is history as we remember it? Join me for another look at history. In the past, there was stated to have been a time where darkness had completely engulfed the land. A time when the population attempted to survive by staying inside, away from the darkness and the demons that seemed to dwell within it. Was this actually a time, or was this merely some mythical account? A year of darkness, a solar eclipse that lasted for an entire year. It seems to defy the laws of celestial mechanics, and yet we have numerous myths, various accounts, legends that state that the only thing seen at night was a moon that was blood red, with no other stars in sight. Join me as we explore this account of this terrifying time. Solar eclipses are displayed and depicted in numerous works of art through the past. They seem to be very dramatic events, the sun being blotted out. Although from our understanding, the longest a solar eclipse lasts is merely a few minutes. And while it may be a dramatic event, it's certainly not an event that lasts. And yet we do have this concept of this profound emotional impact on an entire society and a civilization. It's recorded and memorized. We've also had the official record of the solar eclipses and when they're supposed to happen, going all the way back to Babylonian times. There's even accounts of terrifying gods and deities from older religious beliefs and legends that indicate that there was a time that the very land itself was afflicted by a horrific evil, or an enemy that preyed on the very people itself, which they were helpless to resist. Think of a time with an ancient civilization that faced a terrifying destruction. In this exploration, we're going to examine this entire account of the Year of the Black Sun, a time in which there was a solar eclipse, or perhaps an event that we can only describe as a solar eclipse. Maybe it was something else entirely. And how does it relate to this incredible basilica that still stands to this day in Dyersville, Iowa? There is one component of this story that we've looked at before, but it should be noted that there are other events and other accounts that we have of similar events. And much like with all the other questions that we have, is it possible that the when on these events, the time that they occurred, may have been lost to our understanding? That there's actually an entirely different timeline that currently eludes our understanding. That instead of these being different events that are separated by hundreds of years or decades, these are one event. Imagine a civilization that had reached astounding heights that we can't even begin to dream. Heights of not only technological achievements, but also achieving a true balance in society. A simple balance between the welfare of the individual and the needs of the entire society. Are there any remnants of this civilization that we still see to this day? You can certainly look around in varied parts of the land, to include Iran and various locations in the Middle East, where you'll see signs of incredible architecture and amazing construction, detailed with tremendous precision. There's also the mythical and legendary accounts that we have of some sort of terrifying evil force that swept across the land. Is this really such a myth as we like to think? Or is this actually documenting a historical event that really transpired? The fall of the civilization that preceded ours. Now, of course, official history says that there were numerous civilizations that preceded ours. Although if we're just going off of one particular region of the land, such as the aforementioned Western world, then we talk about the great civilization of Rome, Rome, which began as a kingdom, evolved into a republic, and then some would say de-evolved into an empire. But whatever form of government it had, it was a great civilization. Was there really a civilization of Rome, or did it represent something else? Is it merely a means to explain why we have these ruins that are quite similar across the land, and why we see them everywhere, and not just in Europe, but in places such as Asia to this day? What do these figures in these reliefs really represent? Is this some kind of mystical figure that's even beyond our understanding of who they might be in our true history? Many people would say that this represents a Messiah, a Savior, or could it represent someone else entirely? The continued accounts of the legacy of Gog and Magog, or the invasion of some sort of terrifying and horrific force, of evil or of an ancient enemy that completely overran the previous civilization. We've looked at it and explored it before, the accounts that there was a power that simply couldn't be stopped. But if we understand the civilization that preceded ours to be in better balance and have a better sense of unity, then what would it have taken to overcome that civilization? We understand and theorize that this ancient enemy approached and attacked from many different directions, both internally and externally. And we still see in reliefs in caves, such as Iran to this day, that seem to communicate this story. We even have older maps that record some sort of terrifying force that threatened the land. Now, was it in one simple geographic location, such as with the incredible gates of Alexander that are in the Caucasus regions to this day, that coincidentally may have been protecting one of the last enclaves of this previous civilization? Do we see examples of this story even in what we may consider myth or high fantasy, such as the account of the fall of Gondolin in the works of J.R.R. Tolkien? Is that really just some high fantasy story, or is that actually a story that's influenced, inspired by true events that occurred? We're not talking about our concepts of the classic warfare of the medieval time frame, or even the great sieges that occurred during the latter days of the Roman Empire. We're talking about a more advanced civilization that faced a much more insidious and destructive threat. And that seems to be the original account that we have from the civilization that preceded ours. It's not detailed directly in our current historical account, but bits and pieces of it are scattered in different geographical areas, given different origins, and then given different dates. And as a result of that, we really can't gain an understanding for what actually happened in the past. But if we step back and we put together the consistent pieces, where we have similar events, we can actually put together a series of events based on cause and effect that explain much more elaborately and much more precisely what happened, such as the concept of the leaders of this previous civilization being corrupted by some sort of strange, inexplicable internal force. Now, of course, we may explain this as a spiritual corruption where their behaviors changed completely, but is it possible that they were inhabited by some sort of parasite? As a result of the leadership of the previous civilization being compromised, it led to its complete and total destruction from an external threat from this ancient enemy or adversary that sought to completely destroy it. Now, how exactly did this great civilization contact this ancient adversary or enemy? We have many different theories. Could it have been in their geographical expansions across the land that they had simply come across this adversary or this opponent? Or could this ancient enemy have even been reached in other lands and other realities, what we may think of as portals or nexus points, an area where different lands completely overlap? The access to a dimension of pure chaos and insidious beings that we can't even begin to describe or think of in this day and age. We think we have an idea of the greatest terrors in the land and in our worst nightmares, but perhaps we can't even begin to come close to what actually faced our true ancestors in the distant past. What does seem clear, though, is that the leadership of this previous civilization was corrupted by some sort of terrifying influence, creatures that we may think of as demonic, or creatures that we may simply describe in that manner because we can't even begin to fathom them. As a result of the leadership being corrupted, They did not seek to protect their population as they were originally charged to do so, and acted against their interests. They ordered the population to seek survival below ground in subsurface areas. And this seems to be the account that we have. And keep in mind that this same pattern of events has been repeated, even in our more recent history, such as World War II, where we have accounts of numerous civilian populations seeking shelter underground to escape the bombers that were constantly raining down destruction over their heads every single day. Is it possible that this is merely the latest iteration in a series of events that reflects what happened in the past? If this previous government or the leaders of this civilization that existed before ours had become corrupted, and they were then ordering the civilization to try to survive by engaging in means that were against their best interest, what was really the purpose of these caves, and why do we have so many caves across the land? These are just the known caves in the United States alone, and there are some that suggest that all of these cave systems are actually connected. It is even possible that there could be a deeper surface of caves, another whole level if you will. Now, what's the origin of these caves? Are these the foundations of great structures? Were these purpose-built survival shelters for the last reset event in the civilization that preceded ours? Or could it be a combination? Could they originally be the remains of structures from a previous era that preceded the civilization before ours, that they attempted to repurpose into survival compounds? Some of the underground cities that we have in places such as Turkey and other locations seem to indicate that this is exactly what happened. Although you might be surprised to know that you don't have to go to Turkey to find underground locations that indicate that there were civilizations and settlements that seem to be built to survive a reset event. Take any asylum in the United States from the Kirkbride plan, and every single one has extensive subsurface tunnels. As though someone knew and planned that there was going to be some terrifying event of destruction that seemed to come from the sky and was going to lead to complete destruction of the land. Why is it we always have references to underground travel, underground railroads? Is it just programmed into our more recent history? Or is it once again a reference to something else that happened? That there really was an attempt to survive and escape this destructive event? And what was this destructive event, this reset, this end of the last civilization? Did they finally fall to this ancient enemy? It seems that they did. And as a result, their entire population was destroyed, except for the segments of population that were directed to try to seek survival below ground. Now, did they actually seek survival, or was that a way in which the entire population was changed? We actually have accounts and folklore of people who talk about an event that completely destroyed the land, a cleansing fire, something that you might think of as plasma fire, or something that we have recorded in our history as the destruction of many different cities. Now, once again, our official history tells us that the great cities of the land have been destroyed at different times. For example, the Chicago fire in the 1870s, the fire in London in 1666. And look up any and every city, whether we're talking Chicago, Boston, Nashville, or anywhere else across the land, and you'll find there seems to be a record of some kind of incredible destructive conflagration that completely reordered the entire city. There's even some interesting accounts in folklore that state that this fire came from the sky, from some sort of device in the sky. Is that just merely the product of a strange myth, a very hysterical population that is simply trying to explain the destruction of these cities? Or was the destruction of these cities a much more profound psychological event than the official history informs us? For example, the destruction of Chicago was not considered to be a very high casualty producing event, but it did result in the destruction of a lot of the central city, and it had to be completely rebuilt. It's quite the similar tale for London. Or what if there's another possibility? What if all these fires are actually the same event, and they all occurred, not separated by hundreds of years or decades, but even all within a year? Imagine that, every major city across the land being completely destroyed. And with the surviving population shifted underground, and some accounts saying that the survivors were under the rule of, again, a corrupted leadership, and that corrupted leadership forced them to completely forget their actual history. It influenced them to learn completely different languages and to completely drop their culture. There are numerous examples in even more recent science fiction films and even fantasy films. There are numerous images in the official history that seems to give accounts of a much more complete destruction of this previous civilization. Now think of what we've reviewed so far. We have this account of a previous civilization that was very high functioning and managed a balance between the individual and society. It was attacked by some sort of force that we can't begin to understand, that had the ability to infiltrate it from the inside while threatening it physically from the outside. Somehow, in some way, there was an awareness of some incredible destructive event, a fire from the sky, complete and total destruction of all the cities. We don't exactly know what caused this incredible destructive fire. Was it a series of devices? Was it some kind of technology that we can't even begin to understand? It is even possible that the previous civilization, in developing its incredible energy capabilities and understanding of technology that we can't even begin to understand, and therefore almost seems like magic to us, and would certainly seem like magic to our ancestors, that perhaps that's the way they explain it. That in some way the delicate balance of our previous civilization with the natural environment was disturbed. Or perhaps they'd brought about some other destructive force in their meddling with accessing other physical realms and other realities. We have numerous accounts and tales that talk about the destruction of these cities. And we're not just talking about one city at a time. We're talking about every single city. And let's even take the recent account that we looked at in the town of Dyersville in Iowa. A relatively small town, populated in the 1800s, of course, and yet there's a very strange account of the origin of the settlers in Dyersville. Stated to be two different groups of settlers from the official history, one group being English and the other group being German. The official history says that the English group of settlers in Dyersville just simply moved on, and there's really no record of what happened to them. And then the German settlers took up residence, and they were the ones who built the Great Basilica. But there's a lot of folklore. There are many individuals who still tell different tales of what actually happened. These survivors, the two groups of survivors, we consider them English and German, who actually had to deal with the effects of the reset event. They sought refuge in caves nearby, specifically Maquoketa Caves near Maquoketa, Iowa, and then even the caves south of Dubuque. There are many incredible churches and edifices that are located in Dyersville and in the nearby small unincorporated town of Petersburg. Far too many churches, even to this day, to serve the population. So what's really the story behind this? Why do we have this folklore that gives us something that seems to conflict with the official history? Or maybe I shouldn't use the word conflict. It seems to augment what we have with the official history. We have details from some older individuals who still tell these tales of folklore. Now, some of these people do seem to put more veracity into these tales, that they're actually telling an account of an event that really happened. So who were these two groups of people originally, this group of English and this group of German settlers? Well, it would appear, going off the folklore and taking it at face value, that one group was a group from the caves just south of what is now the city of Dubuque, and the other group was from the caves of Maquoketa. That both of these groups had been forced into the caves by the order of their leaders in the previous civilization, and they completely lost their own sense of identity. They didn't know their own history. They didn't understand the technological achievements anymore of their previous civilization. They were even required to learn different languages, as though they adopted entirely different customs. Now, this may sound absurd, and people always ask the question, well, how could such a thing happen? How could people forget? How could people not know their own history? Well, if someone didn't actually tell you your own history, how would any of us know what actually happened in the 1800s? It's not that long ago. Over 125 years ago, what do we have? The defense will be, we have written records, and these are infallible written records. Maybe, but could they have been changed? Could they have been altered? it is possible that they are completely correct, but there's so many discrepancies. There's the actual presence of the city of Dubuque on the Mississippi, a very impressive old world city which contains a lot of old world architecture. In fact, there are many other towns and cities up and down the Mississippi that seem to give us a completely different origin story. And not just along the rivers, there are also isolated towns and incredible structures in places you would never expect to look. And so what do we have when we look at this story of these two groups of settlers? The folklore goes on to tell us that when they came out from their caves lacking leadership and they found themselves inundated in a land that was completely arid, desiccated, and destroyed. Now yes, we all know that today Iowa and the surrounding Midwest states of the United States are really considered the breadbasket of the United States. This is some of the most fertile soil considered in the world, and everyone can grow crops, soybeans, and the land is fitted for an agrarian civilization. And yet there is an account of a horrific terror that these groups of survivors faced, the year of the Black Sun. When they tried to find their own survival after coming out of the caves, there was nothing for them to subsist on. There was nothing for them to eat, and there was very little water. It seemed that whatever this incredible reset event was, that it completely destroyed all the facets of the land to provide for the people. And so they found themselves in a very desperate state. What were they going to do to survive? There are different accounts of what they actually faced while they were in the caves. And this again comes from the folklore. I mean, there's always the difficult lineage of tracing the actual settlers of German descent in Iowa and the English settlers. And it should be noted there's virtually no other record, or very few records, of English settlers in Iowa. Iowa was stated to be settled exclusively by Germans, as are many other locations in the United States, nearby Wisconsin notwithstanding. So what was really happening? These settlers were actually trying to survive. They were looking for any implements of remaining technology, just as we would if we suddenly found ourselves out in a land that had been utterly destroyed by an apocalypse. What do we subsist on? What do we eat? What water is available? As we understand it, the two groups of settlers struck out, and the nearest intact location that they found, where they may have found something that they could have subsisted on, was in the small town of Dyersville. Dyersville, a town that exists to this day, known for being the home of the more recent Field of Dreams in the eponymous film, and it also contains a very elaborate and tremendous basilica, a minor basilica of the Roman Catholic Church. And we've looked at this structure before. Now, where does the folklore go from here? What happened once these groups of survivors actually found this area? Well, there's conflicting accounts among the folklore. And some say that the group of English settlers actually began meddling with the structure, the basilica. The basilica known as St. Francis Xavier, which still stands to this day. Now, the official history tells us that the construction of this basilica actually occurred in the late 1880s, and that it was built by the generous donation of the local farmers who seemed to be quite prosperous in the area, and they were able to provide enough money for its astronomical cost of construction. And it's safe to say that the Basilica of St. Francis Xavier in Dyersville will be the tallest structure in that town for the next 1,000 years. But what happened when these two groups of settlers actually came across this basilica? Well, as we understand it, the English group of settlers, or at least the group that's identified as English according to the folklore, they began meddling with the basilica. They didn't understand its original technological applications, because all the knowledge had been lost while they were surviving in the caves for who knows how long of a period of time. And yes, the folklore does indicate that the people were in the caves for several generations, and that when they came out of the caves, they sought simply to survive, wandering across an arid land. The German settlers settled south of the town originally, and began operating on a group of rudimentary farms. But survival was very difficult, as at this time this was not the fertile soil that we associate with Iowa, but the destroyed, arid, and desiccated soil that had followed whatever it was with the fire in the land. And so the English group of settlers sought to utilize the power of the structure, what we call a basilica, a cathedral, and it may have had a very different purpose? Was it part of some larger apparatus? Were all of these cathedrals actually part of a greater world machine, if you will? And that in their meddling with it, what the folklore says is that the English settlers actually opened up a portal to a dark and insidious dimension. And as a result of opening the portal to this dark and insidious dimension, they allowed a much more terrifying and very evil force to overrun the land. In fact, there's even references to what this deity may have been called. There are references of Crom Cruach and Moloch. Oddly enough, very similar references to a terrifying deity, a creature, one of the old ones that demanded the sacrifice of children. It's very strange that even though Moloch is associated with Carthaginian origins, or North Africa, and Crom Cruach is associated with Irish origins, that they have many similar story beats to them, that they almost seem to be exactly the same character. And so we really have to ask this question: was this a character in a myth, or was this a real figure, a real force of terror that did actually exist and afflicted the land with its presence, demanding that in order for these settlers to prosper, in order to simply have food and bountiful harvests, that they had to sacrifice their own children? It's very strange and bizarre, and without hesitation, we understand that these settlers and these people did sacrifice their own children to this terrifying deity, all in the name of bountiful harvests for corn and milk and even life returning to the land. That's the understanding of the folklore in any event. And it's a terrifying story. And we do have more examples of a similar story being told in other parts of the land, not just in Dyersville, Iowa. You can find this story in Ireland, in Africa, numerous mythical accounts in Asia. The idea of the sun itself being blocked out by a solar eclipse that lasted for an entire year. That with the presence of this dark entity, whether you want to call it Crom Cruach or Moloch, or if it had an entirely different name, it seems to be something where the land was bathed in darkness, and there were no stars that were seen at night. The only thing actually seen at night being the blood red moon. The blood red moon that accompanied the sacrifices. But it should be noted that even after these sacrifices, that was not enough for Crom Cruach or Moloch. And all of his followers, or all the English settlers in the Dyersville folklore, were killed in a fire that lasted several days. It wasn't until a survivor, a mage, or some sort of individual containing wisdom, somehow possessing it from the old civilization, came and managed to turn off or end the influence and the access from the portal. Knowing the technological application and actually using it within what is today the Basilica. Apparently the nearby church in Petersburg played some sort of role. But we don't know any more of the details than that. It seems as though the actual oral account has lost a lot of the details. Now again, this is just merely the Dyersville story. We understand that the English settlers disappeared, and then the German settlers actually brought about in the town of Dyersville, and the town still stands to this day. But there are other accounts across the land that are very similar stories to this. A group of people seeking survival, deciding to put their faith in a very dark and horrific deity, or perhaps some sort of figure of chaos that because of the portals was actually able to access our land. We think that we deal with the worst forces of the ancient enemy every day in our current physical land, but is it possible that there are much worse variations out there, and that in the effect of meddling with this remaining technology of the old world, this surviving technology of the old civilization, that they enabled access through these portals? And that's why we have this account of the year without the sun, or the year of the black sun. And what exactly was the black sun? What's it really referring to? Why does Dyersville still stand to this day, and why does it have this incredible basilica? A basilica that was actually named and designated by the Pope because of its impressive structural capacity. And what were these forces of evil that came in the past? And what was this black sun? Was it a solar eclipse as we understand it? Or was it something else entirely? What exactly is the explanation of celestial events that we have? And it should be noted that there are many different celestial events that seem to defy our understanding of many different models of what our existence actually is. So how exactly do we reconcile all this? Are all these myths and legends and folklore just simply a primitive and paranoid people trying to explain forces that they didn't understand in the land? We seem to think that we have such a great understanding of what happens now and what we're facing now, and yet we have so many people that oftentimes live in fear and simply move from one event of fear to the next without really trying to understand exactly what the origin of our entire existence really is, or thinking that they understand it, and then simply not asking any more questions. Perhaps the most interesting thing to me, though, about this year of the Black Sun is this entire time where the land was overrun completely by evil forces. And it wasn't just the fact that there were strange creatures and demons reputed to be running through the land at the time. There are even accounts that state that the people did engage in willing sacrifice, that they did decide to actually destroy everything that they had. Now, you may recall in one of our previous explorations, we theorized that there was a safe zone that was set up by the previous civilization, a safe zone that was bounded by the 4 current state capitals of Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Illinois. And there are other very impressive structures. For example, the Cathedral of St. Paul, which is relatively close to the Minnesota state capital. Now, originally, I had theorized that this safe zone was set up by the previous civilization to allow the population to survive. But after studying some more of the folklore and talking to some different individuals, it seems that was not actually the intent behind the establishment of this safe zone. And looking back into this live stream exploration that we did, this safe zone that seemed to be bound by a diamond, the leadership, being corrupted, merely told the people that they were going to be safe in this particular area, that the caves and the presence of the Basilica of Dyersville, or St. Francis Xavier Basilica that resides in Dyersville, that's also near the middle of this designated area, was actually an entirely different event. That it seems that the ancient enemy had contrived this entire event. Much in the same way that if you're familiar with the Fallout universe, or the Fallout intellectual property, where groups of survivors were sent to different vaults to survive a nuclear apocalypse, the real intention behind sending them there was something entirely different. Survival was the last thing that was intended for any of these people. It's almost as though these 2 groups of settlers that we have near Dyersville or Dubuque, Iowa, were actually intended to find the remnants of this technology from the previous civilization. And while the technology could be used to bring about bountiful harvests and tremendous connection and balance between the artificial and the natural of the land, it could also be corrupted. It could also be used to bring about terrifying destructive forces, access, if you will, to a dimension of pure chaos. And that seems to be the exact story that we have here with the folklore behind Dyersville. But there are many other examples of folklore and legend that you can find, where the land was beset by chaos and forces of darkness, where there was a year of the Black Sun. What exactly is the Black Sun? Is it actually some other celestial body that does actually blot out our entire sun? Could it have been possible that it really did happen for an entire year? Or is it something else entirely? Is it referring to something very different than what we understand? Is it actually referring to some sort of object, or what actually happens in the sky is nothing what we think happens in the sky? It could even be a theatrical display designed to bring about some sort of profound psychological response. We do have multiple accounts, though, of the fire that came from the sky, the fire that came from the sky that destroyed multiple cities. And so, was there actually a safe zone, or was it just simply the perception of the safe zone? That these different structures had entirely different uses, not just the incredible Basilica of St. Francis Xavier, as we call it now in Dyersville, Iowa, but the great state capitals? Could they have been part of this larger machine that played a different role in entire geographies? Just imagine that, if there's some kind of technology that really involves these structures being connected. Because we really have to look grand scale here to actually understand what may have really happened. We certainly can't explain the construction of these structures with our given history, because virtually all of them were constructed from 1850 to 1900, during a time frame before the widespread use of heavy machinery. The usual explanations that we have is that there was an infinite source of highly skilled labor available, and there was no reason to question the logistics behind it. There's no reason to question the fact that there are 29 different types of marble in the Iowa state capitol, even though it's well known there are no marble quarries to this day in Iowa. And how exactly do we explain the construction of this very impressive basilica in Dyersville, a town currently of only a few thousand people? In the official population account, when the basilica was constructed, the population of Dyersville was stated to only be 1,000. So how exactly did these farmers actually provide generous donations to build this incredible edifice? The Iowa state capitol itself being attributed to the refund of Civil War grants to the state as a result of fielding so many regiments to fight in the United States Civil War. And you'll find similar stories behind the other incredible state capitals. We certainly know that there was no federal income tax at the time, as all the state capitals were constructed before 1913. So trying to reconcile exactly what happened in our official history with what we have with this account of the Year of the Black Sun doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense. It does, however, make a lot of sense if we have a completely different view of what really transpired. If all of these structures had been standing all this time, and that they were remnants of the previous civilization, that they represented some incredible, larger apparatus, not just the single isolated structure, but all the structures being connected in a way that we don't entirely understand. Now, some people will suggest that they're connected on some sort of ley lines or some sort of geographical pattern, although our actual understanding of how the land is laid out is very, very limited and difficult to understand. Because if you recall, during our map exploration, or the true map of the realm exploration, the actual shape of the land can be distorted, and maps can be distorted, while they can still provide accurate coordinates. And if you want to go watch that exploration, I suggest you do so now. So, would this diamond even look like a diamond, or would it look like something else entirely, while still having accurate coordinates? Well, that's a question I leave to you to answer. Because a lot of people think they know all the answers, but if they know all the answers, then why are they still seeking out those who ask questions? It's a question you're not supposed to ask, apparently. Whether you believe in the veracity of this account or not, or if you think there is any veracity with the fact that we have folklore that connects with these theories that we have of the old world, it should be noted that there are far too many connections to just simply ignore or dismiss. And you really have to just simply ignore and dismiss these connections just at the fact that you have a very flimsy explanation. Yes, that's all you need, one flimsy explanation, and you could dismiss this entire period, if you will, of the Year of the Black Sun. But is that what really happened? Did we have all of this expansion and all this conflict in the way that we think that we did? Because it seems that we did have a lot of conflict and a lot of difficulty that occurred in the land of the past. But what's the real story? Why do we have this entire account of this Year of the Black Sun, and what is it really representing? Is this exactly the folklore that we have of locals from Dyersville, Iowa? Do you simply accept the fact that this incredible basilica, this cathedral, this tremendous edifice really was constructed by the donations of farmers? Of course, we have no details on the contractors. And what about the continuous story of Moloch, or Crom Cruach, with its alternate origins? It should be noted that Moloch has made numerous appearances in various films from the early 20th century. So why is it that this character doesn't exactly go away? Why do we continuously have these references of this presence of this terrifying evil on the land? Who is this Moloch or this Crom Cruach? Is this really some kind of terrifying deity? Or is it one of the old ones, perhaps better described by the fiction of H.P. Lovecraft? Perhaps both perspectives can be true in a way. It's intriguing, though, looking at the Celtic or the Irish version of Crom Cruach, crooked-backed. And that was what the god was called. Now, is it really a pagan belief, or is that merely an association that we have? Understanding true history is difficult because history is constantly being reevaluated all the time. Even the official history is being reevaluated or revised because somehow events become more clear. And maybe that is the situation. What was this Crom Cruach? Was it some kind of terrifying being that we might even define as an alien being? Or is it something else that completely defies all conventions of existence? And many people who think or claim that they have all the answers and yet for some inexplicable reason are still searching for answers will no doubt try to dismiss such accounts as this. And it may be that these are just simply fantastic accounts and that all of these overlapping similarities are merely coincidence. But what I find fascinating is that these are a lot of coincidences to just simply ignore and dismiss without examining them. Did the people of Dyersville, these people that we associate with English settlers who just seem to have disappeared, did they really bring about some kind of chaotic and horrific demonic force that nearly overwhelmed the entire land? It appears that whatever this evil really was, or this deity, or this terrifying threat, it did actually threaten the land with eternal darkness. As it was, we have folklore that indicates that the land was bathed in darkness for an entire year. And why do we always have all of these mythical depictions of these strange creatures, whether they're on old maps or old texts? Ah, yes, history that will tell us that the good people of medieval Europe knew that the world was round because there was a circle. And they also seem to know that there were terrifying fire-breathing creatures that were all over the land, because that's also on the maps. But what was the real intention behind this terrifying being, this Moloch, once it was brought into our physical realm? Was it just simply enough to demand the sacrifice of children? And because the people were willing to sacrifice their own children, that wasn't enough for this horrific deity, and the entire people were killed in the very act of worship. That's what the legend really says. And coincidentally, it says it for both Crom Cruach and Moloch, despite the fact that these two deities and these two thoughts of philosophical or theological belief are vastly divided according to the official history. There are many accounts, whether we're considering religious texts or even other historical accounts, that indicate that maybe these were morality tales. Simply something told to warn the people to behave a certain way. Respect your laws, respect others, otherwise horrific demonic forces will beset the land. And yet, it's intriguing to me that we always have this explicit detail when it comes to this destruction. And then we layer on all of these other details that we have of the official historical account. For example, the destruction of all of these cities, even though they occurred at different times. And it should be noted, there are true accounts of sacrifice, and the sacrifice of children in the past, in the official history, in addition to myth and various forms of odd accounts that indicate that this was a terrifying event that did really happen. How would you really deal with it? If you had survived in a cave, if the only accounts that you had were what your parents and your grandparents had told you, and then when you came out and you're just simply trying to survive, and by inadvertently meddling with something, you had brought about an event where the black sun existed in the world for over a year. And the next thing you knew, you were confronted with this all-powerful being that seemed to demand the very sacrifice of your children. And feeling that you had no other choice for your survival, you acquiesced to this demand. And as a result of this, the Year of the Black Sun did in fact truly happen. And it didn't just happen in Dyersville, Iowa. It happened at varied locations all across the land, and all within the same time period. It's just that the event was recorded in different ways. And with the way we have our official history now, the actual event is spread about, so we can't really understand exactly what happened. But it is mentioned, and it is known, both in the official history and in the myth, that these events did seem to happen. Now, to what extent did they happen? To what variations did they happen? Why should we be terrified of the year of the Black Sun? Well, it seemed to be the one time that, as difficult as we may think that our current existence is, and with all the drawbacks of this current reality, that we could have been facing a much more horrific reality. Continuously bathed in darkness, forced to contend with horrifying creatures, demanding sacrifice, demanding the very torment of humanity. We oftentimes want to say that this is merely a period of the worst things that could be. But is it? Or is it possible that things could be much better? Or could they be much worse? We seem to have different schools of thought that go both ways. Perhaps it's best that we remain aware of these tales and these accounts, that we realize that it could be possible that there are terrifying entities and beings out there with powers that are beyond our wildest imagination. And even with all of this power, even with all this influence, it's interesting to note that Crom Cruach, Moloch, or all the other names that we have for these demonic entities, require the will, the submission, the willful submission of the people that they seek to dominate. That, in other words, the best way to resist them, whether we're talking about the ancient enemy or these entities, is simply not to give in to their will. It's simply to resist them using the power of our will alone. Is it possible that that was what was really corrupted in the older civilization? That the real reason that it fell was that it simply lost its will to resist? That the leaders, for whatever reason, became corrupted, seeking notoriety in the moment? And that's why we have all these accounts of these strange beings, these horrific demons that would come in the night and negatively influence the leaders and those that were charged with safeguarding the previous civilization. Therefore, there are two components of the story. The component of how the previous civilization fell with the corruption of its leaders, and then with the survivors, simply trying to build a new life and inadvertently contacting a chaotic, what we'd consider demonic entity, bringing about the near destruction of the land. Is that what all this art is really referring to? Is that what all this folklore is referring to? Is that why we actually have a very prominent appearance of Moloch in the 1920s German science fiction film Metropolis? Yes, Moloch does make an appearance in that film. And it is very profoundly connected with what's actually happening in terms of the will of the people, and even the will of the very leaders of the city of Metropolis. Why do we have all these references to child sacrifice? It's a very terrifying thing to consider. And yet it does still exist in many different ways. Now, people even use the word. Well, I can sacrifice things if it will bring about a more beneficial life to me. Are they right to do so or think so? The obvious answer would be no. And yet, for some unknown reason, it seems to be a moral question that we still continuously debate to this day. Is there an entity such as Moloch that's still out there somewhere, confined to a different physical realm? Is it possible that the remaining structures that we have could still operate some sort of larger scale apparatus, a world machine, if you will, that could possibly open up that dark portal? Could it be possible that someone even now is meddling with this technology that could bring about a return of the year of the Black Sun? Or could it be even more than a year? Could it be 100 years, 1,000 years, or an eternity of the Black Sun if we're not careful? It may seem like it's all doom and gloom, but don't forget that perhaps the best concept to be realized from all this, whether we're talking myth, official history, or something in between, is that the choice is always left to us. That as long as we retain our true will and our true sense of self, we have the ability not just to resist any sort of deity or evil force or evil will, but the ability to completely overcome it. And oftentimes, the only thing that prevents us from doing so is succumbing to our own internal fears. What did these people really face? Were they completely without hope during this year of the Black Sun? That they only had a few brief moments and there was really no refuge, no respite from it? All they had to look forward to was the darkness of each and every day. No stars, only the blood-red moon. Was there ever any way out? Or did they simply give in to despair? These are terrifying thoughts and considerations, and yet they seem to be the very thoughts and considerations that our ancestors or our predecessors faced. Because remember, While we do have some folklore that corroborates the account from the vicinity of Dyersville in Iowa, there are other stories all across the land that do seem to indicate that something very similar happened. And much like with the varied city fires that officially happen at different points in history, with vast differences in when they happened, what if it was all one event? What if it was all one event that happened within the same 1 to 2 year period? And then the question you're asking is, how exactly was this resolved? How exactly was this terrifying deity, this being Moloch or Crom Cruach, actually removed from the land? And that the terrifying reality of an eternity of the black sun was prevented from transpiring. It seems to be that the legend and the folklore, which oddly enough does match the same legend and folklore of the appearance of St. Patrick. St. Patrick, a wise individual, a religious man, who rose to face the terror of Crom Cruach and banished him to the realm beyond. Oddly enough, if you look at one of the paintings in St. Francis Xavier to this day, it does seem to give the indication of a portal that was actually sealed, and commemorating the return of the incredible sun. Or maybe you interpret this differently. But just really think of that, if that's the way that the story was actually resolved. Did it involve some individual who still retained knowledge of the old world that was actually able to interface with the technology and end this threat? Well, let me know in the comments. Thank you for joining me. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the second weekly live stream for the Rescue Orbis channel this week. I am your host, Lucius Aurelian, and thank you for joining me as we explore the ugly truth behind the greatest 20th century cover-ups. So first and foremost, I'd like to extend a greeting to all viewers, prime explorers, and all others joining us. What are we really going to talk about in this exploration? We're going to examine what a difference is between a cover-up and a conspiracy. And we're going to talk about why we had so many cover-ups in the 20th century. And I'm delighted to see everyone, and thank you for joining me for a second live stream. I thought I might be pushing it with 2 in a week, but it's summer, so why not? So first and foremost, let's cover that elephant in the room. And what are we looking at in this particular image? This is an image of the Bronx, New York City, in 1900. At least that's what the archive says. Now, is it correct? I don't know for sure. It looks like it's 1900. But we notice we have the usual discrepancies with the image. We see a very wide roadway for just a few horses and buggies. Now, perhaps we can assume that there are many busy times during the day and we simply didn't catch it during rush hour. But I always find it interesting when we have these images that show us as though they knew or were prepared for the rapid growth that cities were going to incur in the 20th century. Although keep in mind, we had a 1,000% population growth in the United States as an entire nation from 1800 to 1900. And maybe you just want to accept the fact that immigration can explain it all. And maybe it does, without question, right? So what's the difference between a cover-up and a conspiracy? A cover-up is defined as an attempt to prevent people discovering the truth about a serious mistake or crime. So notice that, a mistake or crime. It can be legal or illegal. And of course, the definition of what's legal and illegal seems to flip-flop quite frequently. I can't imagine why. And naturally, the interpretation of it. And what's a conspiracy? A conspiracy is defined as a secret plan by a group to do something unlawful or harmful. So once again, we have something that may be legal but harmful, which is still a conspiracy. And remember, we do acknowledge that conspiracies exist. The mainstream acknowledges that conspiracies exist, although the only people, according to the mainstream, that can tell you what a legitimate conspiracy is, as opposed to just a conspiracy theory, which is just that, a theory, are certified scientists and historians. And remember, That's not journalists, even though journalists spout conspiracies at us all the time from all sectors of the political spectrum. And it does not include our friend Brian Dunning. No, declaring yourself a skeptoid or a skeptic does not mean that you can determine the difference between a conspiracy or a conspiracy theory. So now that we got that out of the way to start this little exploration, remember that we're going to be looking at the cover-ups that occurred in the 20th century. Now, was there a predefined plan to do these cover-ups, or was somebody just reacting? Oh, good one there from Basil. Can anyone name a historian? Well, you just have to think on that interviewee list from Ken Burns' The Civil War. I think he had a couple of them featured in that miniseries. I am certainly no longer a historian. I am not a card-carrying historian, and I am not a certified historian. So no, I am not certified, according to the mainstream, to tell you the difference between a conspiracy or a conspiracy theorist. I'm just some guy on YouTube. So just keep that in mind. I am not presenting false credentials. Yes, you know my personal history, but, anyways. So let's take a look at some of these images that we have, and we'll look at New York City because that's always the interesting place to start. And whether we're looking at Columbia University or something else, we always find that there are incredible edifices, wondrous structures that were around in New York City at the start of the 20th century or the 1900s, meaning that all these impressive structures were built in the 1800s. Love the pattern over here. Just incredible. I always ask that question. Why don't we build things like this today? And we'll get our usual slew of answers. We're just not inclined to for a variety of reasons. And then that New York City skyline. Now, granted, this is a picture from 1941, but again, it gives you that impressive idea of how New York City looked. And this is at the start of World War II, at least the United States entry into World War II in that particular year, although it had already been going on for several years, depending where you were in the land or wherever. But interesting structures. And yet, looking at these structures, they all have that mentality of the old, beautiful movement to it. And yes, we're going to be discussing the City Beautiful movement, something that cropped up as a result of the World's Fair in Chicago, the Columbian Exposition in the 1890s, which set the stage for the 1900s of the 20th century, which is one of the things that we're really exploring in depth. Ah, yes, the old-timer structural worker stated to be working on the Empire State Building here. And that's why the Empire State Building had so many more stories than the nearby Chrysler Building. I always love these images. And they say they really weren't concerned about safety, although you'll find plenty of newspaper clippings from the 1800s and even early 1900s that talk about safety. But, everyone was just trying to save a buck. I mean, just think about this. One wrong move, and this poor guy is doing a Wile E. Coyote all the way down to Broadway. Okay, that's a joke. It's a bad joke, but, I know what you're going to say. Empire State Building's not there. No, it just sounded good. But you think about this and think about an individual doing this kind of labor and this kind of effort and what the timeline is for the construction of the Empire State Building. Now, again, it's just a photograph. There are some people who try to say, we have video footage of the construction of the Empire State Building. Yes. Do we have video footage that captures every single second of the construction of the Empire State Building? Question one. And then question two, why do we have this odd period in history in the early 20th century where it seemed like we still had the capability to build these wondrous structures? The problem of Art Deco. And maybe there's a couple theories to address that. Is it possible that there were still individuals or still those who had the capability to build the wonderful old world structures? And there needed to be a little bit of a, how shall we say, bridging period from after the last reset when that occurred to the modern times. Because we all know beyond any shadow of a doubt that after World War II, at least in the United States, there were no more of these incredible structures that were being built. Oh, good comment there from Ubu. Is that an Acme building? Yeah, sure, why not? Hey, Sooner West, good to see you. Thanks for joining us. And so, moving on, we also have our incredible Penn Station. And this was also part of this early effort in the early 1900s to show this City Beautiful movement. And we have nothing like Penn Station now. And, looking at the interior, we're not going to do that now because that's a whole other exploration. But it has been covered by other explorers such as John Levi, and he's looked at the interior of it and how incredibly colossal it is on the inside and the out. And you can see what's typically attributed to the City Beautiful movement, and that is the neoclassical or the Beaux Arts architecture, as they tended to classify it. Or you could just say, it kind of looks Roman and ancient Greek. And that's what we have. And then other images of early New York City, always surprising us with some of the capacity and capability with some of the structures, not always necessarily conforming to our expectations of what we'd really expect to see from a population that we always say is a horse and buggy people. We're going to take a look, though, at the exact advent timeline of heavy machinery and really try to deconflict that with what we're being informed is going on. Because as we understand it, many of these structures were completed during a time when there was no heavy machinery available. And there you have it. So, torn down the Waldorf Astoria pretty quickly. Yeah, right, Sean. And that's where they parked the Empire State Building. You know, they had to tear down that Waldorf Astoria as fast as they could. Such be life. Oh, Jamie says it real nicely there. It's only a model. Yes, it does seem to only be a model. But looking at New York City is very poignant because remember, that seems to be our reset center one. That was the main city in the United States, the one of the largest natural ports in the land, and that's where the population seemed to come in through. Here we have the Woolworth Building, a building you can still visit to this day, and a very, very impressive structure. Early 19 teens, and yet somehow they constructed this beauty. And if you go through this building, and if you want to take a look at it, you can go back and look at the New York City exploration. We looked at the interior of it. Very, very impressive towering structure. And frankly, I would argue that there are a few structures that compare to it to this day, especially anything that's been built recently. And then just taking a look at some of the other skyline or other older structures that were part of New York City and what really changed. What really happened in the early 1900s? Do we have a good idea of how the history unfolded from 1900 to 1930? Does it become a little less hazy as we move on? And another question, how many firsthand sources, in other words, how many people who were alive from 1900 to 1930 can we even talk to right now to ask? Really think about that. Because yes, I know I get it in the comments all the time. I overheard my grandma talking about how she hung out with my great-grandfather while he was personally building all these buildings. Okay. Sure, maybe you heard something, but that's why I really have to question it. And that is why the Art Deco component of all these structures is very questionable. So is a possible theory the structures were already there, they were repurposed, or is the other theory there was still some retained knowledge? Some individuals had this esoteric knowledge on how to build these structures, that they still had plans or still had some designs. And then once World War II hit, that was the end. That was all she wrote. There was never going to be another building constructed that was in the likeness of a genuine old world building. Is that a possible theory? I mean, that's why Art Deco continues to be that little problematic statement. And frankly, what's my personal impression of it? It could go either way. It could be the fact that it's a legitimate old world building, or it could be some sort of, how shall we say, amalgamation, abridging, some sort of interphase, if you will, to allow people to believe that, yes, we actually had the capability to build these structures, but now we don't anymore. Although what I would argue that works against that is the impressive interior of a lot of the Art Deco structures. And to end with this portion, this is what New York City looked like in 1999 at the end of the 20th century. And so we can already see that there was a lot of progress. I guess if you're just measuring the height of buildings and the fact that these buildings have many more right angles, then maybe that's a right angle and so on and so forth. So, anyways. My grandmother immigrated from Italy, says Angel, in the early 1900s when she was 3 years old. They settled into Little Italy, but I do remember her telling me that when she was a child that Brooklyn was farmland, which is interesting because there's other accounts that say that Brooklyn was not farmland. But I guess it depends what part of Brooklyn you're really talking about, and that's why it becomes very difficult. Wouldn't it just be wonderful if we could talk to all of our grandparents and great-grandparents and just really ask them what they saw and what they remembered? So on RB here with the other portion of the theory. A lot of humans are reset too, blank canvases to program thoughts. Absolutely, RB. And I was watching Videodrome very recently, where good old director David Cronenberg, wonderful Canadian director, you could say he's the John Carpenter of Canada, or you could say John Carpenter is the David Cronenberg of the United States. I mean, David Cronenberg was born first. But in Videodrome, you have the concept of people being programmed just by watching a television program. How interesting, isn't it? Well, and that's right. I think we all regret not asking the questions. And did we know to ask them or not to ask them? There's also the concept of the silent generation. A lot of people who would not answer your questions or not want to talk about it. And we'll go into why. Hey, Sissy, good to see you. So that's all we have for New York to start off with. But let's take a look at where we advanced in the 20th century. What developments did we really have? Because that's something that comes up in a lot of our explorations. What kind of advances did we have, and how do we reconcile that with what really happened? Now, I thought I would start here with one of my favorite little interesting quandaries in history, and something that got me in a lot of trouble asking nasty questions about that I probably shouldn't have been asking. And what we have here is one of the old 15th century cranes that was on the cathedral in Cologne. This picture, Cologne, Germany, that is, this picture is attributed to 1868. Now, who knows? I don't know. I always found it interesting that we're informed that the mighty Cologne Cathedral was built over a period of 600 years. How exactly would that work with all the winters and difficult conditions in Germany? Not really sure. Although, let's be honest, they started building it before it was Germany. Germany was just really an idea, I suppose, or was it? Who knows? But this was the technology that was available in the 1500s. How did this crane work? How did they operate it? Who knows? This is just a picture we have of it. What could you really lift with that crane? Could you even lift Sylvester or Tweety Bird to the top of Cologne Cathedral with that crane? Who knows? But then we also have these other images. And what I find really intriguing is that on the official account for the development of cranes, they show us this image of the, human tread wheel crane. We also call it the, humorously, human hamster wheel crane. Oddly enough, this image is the construction of the Tower of Babel. So this actually appears in several history books, and I think it does still appear in the Wikipedia entry. Now, I know that's not really proving anything. It's Wikipedia, and anybody can put anything on there. It's just interesting to me that this appears on there. So they are documenting what is supposed to be an official historical piece of equipment on a mythological building that, according to mainstream history, did not exist. Unless, of course, you're going to walk it back and say, well, it's one of those ziggurats that they were building, from the Babylonian or the Assyrian times. That's really what the Tower of Babel was. Okay, fine. But we're going with the biblical representation, a tower to reach the heavens. Just another one of those little inconsistencies. And so this is what they're trying to say. Yeah, there you go. The leverage is comical. Good one, Punchy. And Robert says it really well. Total BS. Agreed, Robert. Agreed. But this is what's presented to us. Now, you can find many images, especially when you research the construction of the United States highway system. Now, of course, I reference the United States because the United States had that impressive development program from the 1800s to the 1900s, and it was on a very constrained timeline, especially compared to Europe. Over in Europe, they're going to tell you, yes, we spent hundreds of years building these impressive cathedrals. In the United States, they didn't have hundreds of years. So you'll have images like this that show the incredible construction, whether it's a highway, a structure, an interstate, and all the technology that went into it. Now, we'll look at the development of heavy machinery here in a second, but then you have other images like this, very clearly older images that show much heavier machinery in these factories, in these areas that, back when they had the term manufactory. Anybody ever see that term? It's a manufacturing plant. It's a manufactory. And you always have that series of questions. Well, one, how did they construct this equipment? Two, if they did, how exactly did they move it? Because when you have these images from the start of the 20th century, at least if that's what the archive attributes them to, you didn't really have the extensive heavy machinery to move this. You can always just say, well, they had trains. They could do everything with trains. Okay, well, if trains were good enough, then why bother with a highway system? Well, because Henry Ford invented the Model T, and they needed to have something to drive it on, right? And by the way, remember that the Model T was fielded and sold before the official development of the U.S. highway system. What are the odds, right? And here we have President Eisenhower's, this was when he was Lieutenant Colonel Eisenhower after World War I in 1919, when he tested the practicality of running a U.S. Army convoy with the most advanced vehicles available at the time across the country, going from east to west coast. If memory serves, I think they ended up in San Francisco, about 3,500 miles. And this was before the development of the highway system in the United States. And it took them 2 months to make this very difficult and arduous journey. There was washed out areas of the road. There was infrastructure that wasn't in existence. There were bridges that were missing. There were all kinds of problems. And again, according to the official history, this is what prompted President Eisenhower, once he was elected to the presidency, again after his experiences in Germany, seeing the Autobahn, to make sure that the United States had an interstate system. Although after this, in the next decade, in the 1920s, the United States passed the Highway Act, and that's when many of the numbered highways in the United States were built prior to the interstate system. But all very interesting to think about this. This is after World War I. And remember, the United States rapidly built a very large army in World War I, rapidly fielded it, and deployed it to Europe in an expeditionary capacity. And remember, while the achievements of the nations in World War I fighting, they were fighting in their own backyard. The United States deployed an expeditionary force across an ocean. But yet, after that conflict, it did not have an improved road network system across the continental United States. I find that very interesting. And you can see those maps on what the original interstate system was. Now, you may recall, at least channel members in the distant past, we did an exploration on interstates and what they're really designed to do. You move fast and you keep on driving. And it's very interesting where interstates go and where they don't go. For example, I-90 does not actually go into Rochester, Minnesota. It goes to the south of it. But it does go right past Austin, Minnesota, where the Hormel plant is, and it has 7 exits there. There's only 2 exits to Rochester. You may recall that Rochester, Minnesota is the location of the Mayo Clinic, the finest medical facility in the entire land. But there's only 2 exits off of I-90 to it, whereas there's 7 exits to get to the Hormel plant in Austin, Minnesota. Just interesting. So what does the interstate system do? Well, basically it allows you to bypass all the old world sites driving at 80 miles per hour. In fact, even more comical, if you're on I-94 before you branch off to I-90 in Wisconsin, you'll go right past this area called Castle Rock, where there's this incredible buildup of rock, and you'll be driving past it doing 70 or 80 miles per hour, and you won't see it. You might see it for 10 seconds, blink, and you'll miss it. It's just interesting how that all works out. But why develop the interstate system? You had the trains, right? Well, you needed to develop this impressive interstate system. You needed to have the ability to rapidly defend the United States from foreign invasion. Although the other explanation for it was the United States was fielding its intercontinental ballistic missiles, and that was the whole reason they built I-70. So you get many different reasons for why this impressive interstate system was rapidly constructed and what it takes to maintain it. Now, back on the note of wondrous technological developments, here's a good one from Clara. Thank you for this comment, by the way, Clara. There were no Autobahns in Eastern Germany. Hitler built them out of concrete segments. I'm thinking of the A9 to Salzburg. Very, very interesting, too, that Eastern Germany didn't have Autobahns. And that's a good point. Thank you for sharing that. So, again, it's one of those things that causes us to question because it doesn't seem to match up what our understanding is. But who knows what really happened. So, Dwayne with a good comment here. Is Hormel better with mayo? It depends. I mean, back in the 90s, I enjoyed some Hormel products, but, it's a matter of taste. Now, the other major technological development in the 20th century, aerospace engineering. The SR-71 Blackbird, considered by many to this day to be the pinnacle of aerial achievements. Although I guess unless you watch Top Gun 2 and you see the SR-72. Although, have we really gone further than the SR-71, or is it just a matter of fantasy? Who knows? Who's to say? But I remember even in the 1980s, 20 years after this plane was developed and fielded, it was still considered a technological marvel in the 1980s, 20 years later. Very, very fascinating. Now, you can look at the images of the construction of the interstates and the highway system, and one of the big political controversies, or one of the other effects of developing the interstate system, is how many inner city areas were just simply destroyed. And, of course, these inner city areas fortuitously happen to consist of many old world structures. They also happen to be the residence of many people who had moved into those cities. And, of course, modern critics tell us that there are particular people that seem to be targeted in these areas. Now, I'm not going to discuss that in this exploration. You could say it's a coincidence, but it's very, very interesting when you see which political party was stated to be in power and what their aims were and why they did this. It also conforms or corresponds with the urban renewal projects in the United States of the 1950s and then especially the 1960s. So, again, you have things that are happening that don't seem to be commensurate with the stated goals. Now, I know what you're saying. Political parties doing things that they say that aren't part of their goals is just a part of good politics. And yes, that would be technically correct. Now, let's not forget the wondrous Concorde, the incredible jet passenger plane that would allow you to go from New York City to Paris or London in a very short amount of time. Certainly not the 6 to 8 hours that it takes now, depending on what flight line you take and how many stops you have to make. Yes, why was it we didn't want to continue flying around the land at rapid speeds? Well, it wasn't considered practical, and it was also stated to be very loud. I guess people who live by airports are not used to very loud noises, and that's the official reason given for not continuing on with the use of the Concorde or supersonic travel. By the way, where's that hypersonic plane we've been promised all this time? Well, I guess they just haven't gotten around to it. Maybe, some well-to-do billionaire or some individual will come up with a concept and make it practical. Just not today. All right, now the moment you've been waiting for. The history of heavy equipment, the official history. And what do they tell us about the development of heavy equipment, and why is it so pertinent? Because as we understand it, most of the heavy equipment that we used to build our incredible structures in a very short amount of time, especially in the United States, were developed and fielded in the early 1900s. And here in the late 1800s, you see this little steam railway digger that we have. The second industrial revolution in the United States ramped up use of machines across the country. But it was 1886. So well after the construction of all those impressive state capitals that we've looked at, to include the Iowa State Capitol, building number one on this channel, but many others. And what's stated to be the first heavy machinery? It's actually a combine harvester, so working in the farm fields. The steam engine tractor was 4 years later in 1890. Although you may recall when we did the railroad exploration, we have conflicting accounts that there were other steam-driven vehicles that were available before then, but obviously not heavy machinery. And as someone tried to tell me in the comments, there's no way Custer could have had steam-driven tractors to run his lines of logistics. It would have gone all the way back to Washington, D.C. because of all the fuel he would needed for the steam engine. I don't know. It was just kind of funny comments, someone who was knee-jerk reacting, but whatever. Not to be outdone, John Froelich invented the gas-powered tractor soon after that in 1892. So again, these were the incipients of heavy equipment. It wasn't practical prior to 1892 is what I'm taking from this. And then 1906, Holt ran his gas-powered type tractor. Track tractor, which was the first of its kind. So really the start of mechanization. His Caterpillar tractor utilized continuous track technology. Very, very intriguing. But it's not until the 1920s that we have the advent of bucket wheel excavators. And so this is where you get this account of being able to dig and move a lot of dirt. And yet recall, when we did the mud flood explorations, namely the cities of Omaha, Kansas City, and Seattle, the official historical account says the lion's share of their regrading projects, where they were moving entire hills and ridge lines and everything, happened before the 1920s. They try to gray area it by saying they finished it in the 1920s, but most of the accounts say it happened well before the 1920s, before this technology or this equipment was available. And then, of course, as you move on, 1930s, 1950s, 1970s, you see what we tend to see with all of our highway construction or renovation these days, and that's the large mobile cranes, which most certainly were not available in the early 1900s. But that's what we're informed. And then, of course, you have modern bulldozers and modern cranes and so on and so forth. But what's really changed? What does it really tell us about what our capabilities were? Did we actually have the capabilities to build these incredible structures from 1900 to 1930 before most of this equipment was even fielded? Yeah, there you go, Sean. Sounds like an excuse to get rid. Yeah, pretty much. And that seems to be what we have, too. Yeah, I'll be that's what they'll say. They use some kind of pulleys, and then we've got those pictures that show all those really odd-looking cranes, but you don't really see any practicality to it. Of course, there's never any practicality to it because you don't see a lot of workers around the buildings, even though the people that defend the mainstream accounts say they had more labor. People had to work or they died. They worked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you didn't need to worry about supplying them. I guess they didn't need food, water, or sleep, right? RB, they constructed the buildings but forgot to build the roads. Oh, that's another good one. And so very true. Good comment there from Elusive Truths. Let me make sure I get that one up. Nothing has changed. Steam is still the only efficient means of converting energy to electricity. That does seem to be the case predominantly, doesn't it? What really happens in those nuclear plants? Anyway. Jamie, I think they used airships as cranes. Well, that would make a lot more sense, wouldn't it? Especially if they had that capability. But that's one of those questions that we have. So, yes, Sean, that was the first Erie Canal. Who needed any heavy machinery to build the Erie Canal? They say that primarily it was done by immigrants, and those immigrants also faced physical attacks while they were building it. And remember, they had to pull down all the trees too, then dig the thing out. Yeah, it wasn't quite that simple, was it? But, it wasn't any kind of folly. They could easily do it. So, yeah, and, some kind of airship, some kind of capability that we just didn't think that they had at the time seems to be what we would line up with. And, we've seen this plenty of times. I mean, are we to really believe that a little machine like this is actually responsible for digging out the entire foundation of Union Station in Kansas City? That massive building that has 100 to 150 foot tall roofs and ceilings on it. Yeah, sure. Maybe. maybe. Now, you can also look at early maps that show the United States system of highways. When did the highways really start in the United States? Was it not till the 1920s, or were there indications that there were highways there earlier? Well, again, the official history will tell you they had the Lincoln Highway, and then they started with Highway 30, and then they built the rest of them. By the way, Highway 30 runs on what the Lincoln Highway ran on. It actually goes right through the middle of Iowa, coincidentally enough. And then we augmented it with the entire national highway system, the Eisenhower Interstate System. Now, just think about this. If you really want to find a problematic logistical problem to wrap your mind around, try to figure exactly how the United States built all of its highways, all of its numbered highways. Don't even think about the interstates because that didn't come until later. But just all the highways, the amount of mileage, the amount of material, the amount of labor, and then the progress that they made in a very short amount of time. Now, of course, those of us that live in the United States are well familiar with the fact that we're constantly renovating all this infrastructure that we rapidly built, apparently, or we're removing it, or how much older infrastructure are we still relying on? Therein lies the question. But try to figure that out. How much mileage did they really build? What did it really take? And how did they do it in a short amount of time? Now, you'll have images like this. Now, this is from the construction of the interstate system, so 1950s, 1960s. And look at all these bulldozers. And keep in mind, this is just one section of interstate that we're talking about here. And try to reconcile that with the availability of equipment and personnel at that time in the 1920s. And suddenly you realize the logistical problem becomes much more difficult. Also, compare and contrast the timeline with how long it took them to lay out the interstate system with how long it took them to build the U.S. highway system. Now, I know what you're going to say. Well, the interstate system should have taken longer because, you're talking multi-laned interstates, whereas the highways were typically 2 lanes. True. But compare and contrast the mileage. And even if you want to try doing the math problem with doubling or quadrupling the amount of interstate mileage, really compare it with the stated mileage of the highway system. Now, I'm not going to do this one for you because I really want you to come to your own conclusions. It's very, very interesting. I also have a feeling I might incur some technical difficulties if I point out things a little too directly. And then let's not forget, in the 20th century, we had the computer, the development of the computer from soup to nuts. There was no computer in 1900, and by 1999, pretty much everybody had the internet. I know it was the rudimentary internet. It was text-based, and, it took forever to download a song. Remember Napster? I remember when it would take all night just to download a single album. Not that I used that Napster. I had a friend who used it, Don't come after me, okay, Megadeth? But anyways, just think about that, development of the computer. The Cray supercomputer, which in the 1980s, they used to render graphics in the movie The Last Starfighter. I think if I remember that correctly, that was the story behind it. So all those developments in the 20th century. And how far did we really come? Okay, Kathy's going to admit she used Napster. All right, well, thanks, Kathy. Yes, I might have grabbed a couple songs with it, all right? I'll confess. Hopefully nobody comes after me for it. You never know. Got to be careful what you say. But a series, I wouldn't be surprised if it was part of the cover-up to cover up things. Well, and that's just it. Because think about it. What was really the pinnacle of technology? Why did aerospace technology really seem to peak in the 1960s, and what has it been since then? Why haven't we gone further? Those are all part of the questions that we ask. We had all these developments in the 20th century. Really, the entire modern world was developed and conceptualized and implemented in the 20th century. But where have we gone since then? We're already a quarter of the way through this century. How far have we gone since 1999? Again, just open questions. So, oh, Brian. Michael, I was a guru on Napster. Parker was a riot. All right. Well, let's go back to the start of the 20th century and look at what happened with all the economic turmoil. Because I'm sure if you've read the comments, you know that another one of the points of defense for the mainstream account is that we just had so much more money at the start of the 20th century or the 1900s. Money was freely available. There were no economic problems in the United States or the world for that matter. Well, let's just review that going off of the official historical account and see what understanding we can come to. Now, going back, we'll start in 1907. And what you're viewing here is New York City, right in front of Federal Hall. Hey, I think I see Solid as Snake's body there by George Washington. But anyway, you are seeing the start of the Panic of 1907. Now, people who try to say that the United States was some kind of economic superpower already, the official historical account says otherwise. In fact, if you go back to the United States Civil War, let's just recount here. I will really fast. At the end of the United States Civil War, there was a recession, 1865 to 1867. There was another recession, 1869 to 1870. There was the Panic of 1873 and the Long Depression. Remember, that was while Grant was president, and that was considered the Great Depression of the United States, the worst until the actual Great Depression in 1929. There was a depression of 1882 to 1885, a recession 87 to 88, another recession 90 to 91. There was the Panic of 1893, the Panic of 1896. And then we begin the 20th century, 1899 to 1900, with a recession. Another recession in 1902 to 1904. There was the Panic of 1907, which we're going to look at. Officially, the Panic of 1907 was the Knickerbocker Trust Company deposits. They ran out trying to buy this copper company, which didn't exist that long, and suddenly it led to monetary contraction. And we'll talk about who saved the day on all these occasions because they didn't have the Federal Reserve System. Although it should be noted that the Panic of 1907 contributed to creating the Federal Reserve System. There was a Panic of 1910 and 1911 and a recession of 1913 and 1914. And then there was a post-World War I recession and a depression of the early 20s. So, yeah, when you look up all this, you get the impression that the economic situation was very, very dire in the United States. It seemed as though the nation was on the verge of economic ruin just about every 2 to 3 years. There was a panic here, a recession there, and because of the independent monetary system that had been set up, in other words, there was fixed currency available, then it was just going to lead to economic ruin. And who kept saving the day and why? Hey, New West Reset, good to see you. And, you may recall when I did the explorations with Old World Exploration, we talked about all these panics and these recessions. So if the United States economy is teetering on the verge of ruin, which is exactly what the official history tells us, how exactly did they have all this infinite money to build all these impressive structures? How does this perception that there was money available to do whatever they wanted to, and now here in the 21st century, or whatever you want to call now, we're just suddenly poor? I'm noticing a conflicting account. Oh, yeah. I mean, does this really look like there's a panic going on? These guys just look like they're having a great old time. Hey, wave and sign. I mean, this is attributed to that panic. Enter John Pierpont Morgan, J.P. Morgan, J.P. Chase and Morgan, Morgan and Chase, or whatever you want to call it. Well, this is J.P. Morgan himself, an individual who was stated to have been behind all the quote-unquote progressive banking policies of the United States. Now, this guy was a financier. He was also a massive business magnate, and he was really the one who ushered in this change, if you will, from this independent monetary system to the Federal Reserve being implemented in 1913. What else was J.P. Morgan known for? Well, he owned a few companies and started a few multinational companies such as GE, United States Steel, and believe it or not, these were actually considered massive monopolies. And who was president when he did most of this in the early 1900s? Well, that'd be Teddy Roosevelt. And Teddy Roosevelt had a reputation for being a trust buster. In other words, they didn't want to have all these large business conglomerates. But apparently this didn't apply when it came to J.P. Morgan, because remember, Teddy Roosevelt was a Roosevelt, and Roosevelts in the United States are not ever affiliated with policy failures, only policy successes. So he was all about Mr. Morgan's acquiring of all these incredible international businesses, to include the eponymous International Tractors, which supplied many of the early farms in the 1920s, after they built that highway system, of course. And he also financed Tesla's little broadcast tower project in Colorado, at least until he didn't. Wardenclyffe, Wayne-Cliff, all the different funky names for it. Nice old world building down there. But it seemed like Tesla was going to get somewhere, and then according to the official history, J.P. Morgan just cut financing for no real reason. Not really sure why, but yeah, that's what the official history says. And then the Knickerbocker Trust building. Now, Knickerbocker Trust was the major trust that we read about that fell apart trying to invest in this copper company that didn't exist very long. Heck of a building. Their building's on the right. And then this other very impressive building. Boy, why don't we build structures like this anymore? This kind of reminds me of the Capitol domes on the Iowa State Capitol. Imagine seeing that on every single building. But yeah, that's what the official history says happened with the financial situation. And you can see how Knickerbocker Trust started as a very, very subtle building in the 1890s, and then they grew up to that. And then to this structure, such as this. Interesting, this is a symbolism here. And why don't we do these impressive columns anymore? Well, simple. We don't have City Beautiful movement anymore. Yeah, you see where this is all going. So yes, they experienced rapid economic growth, and then it all fell apart in the Panic of 1907. Don't back that copper company. It was really bad. And so then all that led, the Panic of 1907, the United States passed the 16th Amendment, where they decided to impose a federal income tax on the entire nation, something that had only happened during the Civil War and then until the early Reconstruction period. So I think it was 1861 to 1873, they had an income tax and then they brought it back. And for some reason, because the nation had accumulated funds for the government through tariffs, everybody was apparently okay with this. Oh yeah, sure, federal income tax, 1913, sure, why not? I mean, we've had all these economic panics and recessions, but sure, we're happy to pay a federal income tax. And, you know, there was never any reports or accounts of any sort of rebellion or revolt or even a political movement to resist this. Oh, no, everyone was cool with this. And apparently both major political parties in the United States were all about this too. I mean, a federal income tax, why wouldn't you do it? And then the establishment of the Federal Reserve. By the way, both of these landmark watershed events in the United States occurred in the year of 1913. First with the income tax and then the Federal Reserve passing towards the end of the year. All as a result of the Panic of 1907 and all the other financial turmoil. Now, our friend J.P. Morgan was the guy who, prior to the establishment of the Federal Reserve, he really acted as the de facto Federal Reserve because, as we understand the way banking worked then, the banks were defaulting because people wanted to make a run on the banks, and the banks didn't have the money because they lended out more money than they actually had in their possession. And what we have is an account that J.P. Morgan propped up all the banks and then convinced the other financiers using his strong personality and will to just donate money or give their money to prop up the banks in 1907. And that's how they stopped the Panic of 1907. And then after that, officially, the Federal Reserve exists to ensure that problem doesn't happen. We won't say anything about what happened in 1929. There's no reason to. Now, oddly enough, J.P. Morgan did have a competitor in all of his business ventures. And one area where he didn't succeed was when Charles Yerkes, a guy who was a mass transit developer, he was also known for being active in Chicago, stopped Mr. Morgan from developing the Underground Railway or the transit system in London. And it's funny because J.P. Morgan said that Charles Yerkes here was a swindler and he didn't play fairly. Yes, how interesting. Now, don't you find it really unique? How could a guy with the influence of J.P. Morgan, who really had the president, at best not resisting him, but it seemed like he was actively supporting him. I mean, I don't know. I mean, you can read the history and come to your own conclusions. Not actually accomplish anything that he wanted. I mean, what was going on with Charles Yerkes here? And you may recall that Charles Yerkes has the Yerkes Observatory through the University of Chicago that's named after him. It's that really impressive observatory that still stands today near Lake Geneva in Wisconsin. It's a very interesting building that has some very unique symbolism on the outside and the inside of it. In fact, you'll find two symbols if you go inside this building parked next to each other. Two symbols that you would never think would appear next to each other, but they do in the Yerkes Observatory. And to add even more mystery to this, the Yerkes Observatory has this incredible telescope that was featured at the Chicago World's Fair in 1893. Isn't it interesting how all of these accounts, all of these explorations just all intersect perfectly here? All these individuals at these very critical moments that are just connected. Hey, Donald, thank you for that. The cities were abandoned because of the rapture. Yeah, maybe so. Maybe so. Hey, thank you, New West Reset, and welcome to the new members. I appreciate that. And so, again, it's all connected. Yes, Lake Geneva, Brian, in Walworth County, Wisconsin, a very, very interesting area. We've covered it many times. And here you have a picture of Halley's Comet, apparently taken through that telescope. I'm not really sure. Why are the stars all flying really fast? Why do they look so funky? Maybe it was just a photography limitation at the time. I'm not sure. Good old Halley's Comet. This is J.B. Pritzker. He is the current governor of Illinois. And fortuitously, he owns several properties in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. He also owns the most expensive boats on the lake. Quite a coincidence. By the way, in 2020, Walworth County was the place that you went anywhere really, Wisconsin or Illinois, if you didn't want to have, how shall we say, certain restrictions to your dining habits. I'm not kidding. This really happened. I've mentioned it a couple times. So, yes, the economic turmoil that seemed to set the stage for the 20th century, all connected. All of these panics, all these recessions, and yet one individual who seemed to have all the power and money apparently just laying around because the official historical account, oh goodness, the official historical account says that they were running out of money. There was not a sufficient money supply. And yet JP Morgan was always there. Apparently he just had bank vaults of money, or maybe he sold some of his artwork, or who knows what he had. He had gems that he apparently collected and was able to raise the necessary funds to provide a monetary supply to get the United States out of these panics until they got sensible enough and established the Federal Reserve. You know, maybe they really should have put Andrew Jackson on every single monetary denomination if they really wanted to, stick it to Andrew Jackson, because apparently he was against the federal system and the centralized banking system. Was he? Who knows? So anyway, from that, let's go and take a look at the City Beautiful movement and a result of the expositions. So we've already mentioned the connection to the Chicago World's Fair, again, where everything seemed to start for the 20th century in the 1890s. Let's look at the concept of the City Beautiful movement. Now, we've talked about this before, but what the City Beautiful movement was apparently an effort to plan many of these great cities in the early 20th century, the 1900s, based on the incredible layout of the Columbian Exposition for the Chicago World's Fair. I become aware of controlled opposition. Yes, it's probably a good thing to be aware of. And that's why it's good to think for yourself. So, anyway, as a result of the City Beautiful movement, we have all these impressive neoclassical structures and also the rise of the Beaux Arts movement. So somehow, despite not having heavy machinery, despite having all these panics and recessions, all these cities, and not just the United States, but across the land, embrace this City Beautiful movement. Such as here, you might recall, I think everybody knows where we're actually looking at. I'll give you a hint. Rocky ran towards this building. They're just mad that they took away your statue, Rock. Yeah, they did take away the statue. They also seem to take away the magic in those movies. I don't know how they did that, but anyway. But you can see the layout here of Philadelphia, Benjamin Franklin Parkway. And the layout is supposedly inspired by City Beautiful movement. Or perhaps it's inspired by the fact that it would bankrupt the city to tear down that beautiful, beautiful City Hall. Now, it's not just the United States, but Canberra in Australia was also laid out on the City Beautiful movement. So the capital of Australia was inspired by the City Beautiful movement, and the layout from it apparently came from that concept of the Chicago World's Fair. So don't you find this very, very, very interesting that all this is just rolling together? All this is quite connected. Oh, you could say that. It might be much more than that too, for all we know. Jamie. Oh, glad you're enjoying it. Thank you. Hope things are going well in Sioux Falls. I need to get back there. A lot of things to explore. So, other things to look at. Here's the original inspiration from the Chicago World's Fair, and we've seen these images quite frequently. And yes, there's been a lot of explorations questioning the veracity of these images. I think it was Howdy Mikowski who did a look at it about a year or so ago, looking at all the problematic photos that we have. But even if we take everything that we're informed of the World's Fair at face value, the Chicago World's Fair and all the rest, that these were temporary structures designed to be brought down. And remember, the official account says that a lot of this burned down after Chicago World's Fair. How exactly to use this as an inspiration to build permanent cities. Well, heck, if this is all it took, why not just draw pictures and send them all across the land? That would be a lot cheaper and a lot more effective. But I guess you wouldn't be able to get all those people that came to the Chicago World's Fair to visit it, would you? So it's all very, very intriguing. Everything going back to the World's Fair, the incipience event, if you will, setting up the way things were going to be in the 20th century. And going back to Denver at the City and County building, you might remember the exploration that we looked at. Yes, they built this during the Great Depression. So again, recessions, depressions, panics, the worst economic recession in the history of the land did not stop the construction of a building in the Mile High City. I mean, why would it? And then, of course, looking at Harrisburg, going back to Pennsylvania here, and this being the result of the City Beautiful movement. Yes, it's quite grating looking at the left and the right, and even seeing which structures still stand and comparing and contrasting them. Oh, I might have to do more of this where we impose images next to each other like this just to get an idea of how things looked in the past and how they look now. Yes, all City Beautiful movement. How interesting, though, how the state capitol almost looked a little, I don't know, dirty, even during the City Beautiful movement. Maybe it's just a result of the image. I don't know. I mean, they got a wonderful one there. I'm not denigrating it. We've looked at it before. Oh, and even in random places like in California, where they just have this Neptune fountain at one of the special communities, obviously a coastal community. Huh. Is that a little cartouche I see there? It is a cartouche. I got cartouches on it. Ooh, look at this figure. What is this supposed to be? The Jackal Man? Really, really odd. Funny when you look at these in detail. Oh, and then we have our famous little seashell that's got a little face above it. And very interesting spewing fountains. Oh, yeah. I mean, I guess you could say that is California, but why are they building a statue to Neptune in California? Is that Randall Flagg up there? Not sure. And then in Melbourne, looking at another city in Australia that made the news a lot, especially about 5 years ago for reasons unknown. And here we have another little commemoration to the mausoleum of Helicanarsis. I mean, why shouldn't Australia get in on it? So Melbourne, apparently inspired by the City Beautiful movement as well. And then, of course, looking at Chicago or any other city that you want to look at. This one being Cleveland. I know, I was just fooling you for a little bit there. You might remember the tower over here that we looked at. Yes, Cleveland. Now, Cleveland doesn't exactly get the best reputation today, as do many of our modern cities, but very impressive layout, and it looks very pretty. And by the way, if you do go through Cleveland, make sure you dine in the Marble Hall, because guess what? It really will convince you that City Beautiful movement does persist there. Now, did City Beautiful movement really happen? Or is it an example of a cover-up of all cover-ups? Because how exactly do you explain the fact that you have this beautiful and inspiring architecture, and then after World War II, you go away from it? Oh, I was wondering when somebody was going to get that. Yes, Michael, I do prefer the 1990s adaptation. I know it was Molly Ringwald, but she did a good job in the film. Got to give credit where credit's due. What's that there, Vaughn? Solomon was 600 years before Christ, or so they say. Yeah, was it 600 years or 1,600 years? Remember, we only deal in thousands at certain times, right? Good point there. But very, very interesting. All these City Beautiful movements, all these attributes, all these references to one single World's Fair in Chicago. And remember, they had just rebuilt Chicago after that nasty fire in the 1870s. And here's the old and new Parliament houses in Canberra, Australia. The old one is in front, of course, which I'm sure you'll find, looks like they got the symbols on it and everything else. And then the new modern one in back. How fitting. I got to give them credit. At least they're willing to put the new one right next to the old one. I mean, that takes some gumption there. Or, maybe you just don't care. And then just looking at what the concept was, these drawings for this design and this layout of the City Beautiful movement from the Columbian Exposition. So, did it really happen? Oh, and I'd be remiss if I didn't show the National Mall in Washington, D.C., and we've explored this a couple times too, including our favorite Smithsonian Castle. But don't worry, that was built before the City Beautiful movement. But then some of these other structures. Oh, and then trying to reconcile the problematic construction of Federal Triangle. But really, all of these massive structures that just roll along the National Mall. Washington, D.C. is such an interesting city for so many reasons. Not the least of which when you see politically opposed members of our illustrious Congress eating together and having a good old jovial time. Hey, look, they're getting along really, really well. They should do that. I'm glad they get along well. We need more bipartisanship in the United States. I mean, it's not like we have more than two viable political parties, right? But when you go to the National Mall and you look at all these incredible structures in this layout, you get the impression there's something very interesting going on. Was this all just inspired by City Beautiful, or was it something else? Did they really build this impressive dome during the United States Civil War? Did they have a different dome earlier than that? And why is it there was a dome on St. Paul's Cathedral in London from the 1600s? Why didn't they just copy that earlier? Well, maybe they just didn't have the money. Remember, there were monetary limitations. So yes, the City Beautiful movement, part of our incredible cover-up. Hey, Ryan, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Make sure I keep up on those. Yes, Kathy, it is quite a grid, isn't it? A very interesting grid when you look at Washington, D.C. Yeah, I'm with Heidi. It does seem to be something else. Anyways, so that's the first part of our exploration. We're going to take a little 2-minute break here, and then we're going to switch gears quite a bit. We're going to take a look at the role of asylums in this cover-up and look at one of the darkest tales that we've ever had. So before we go on break, please make sure that you hit that like button. Appreciate everyone being here and supporting the channel, and I hope you're enjoying this exploration. We're going to take a 2-minute break, and we'll pick up with the role of asylums and the darkest tale with the 20th century cover-ups. See you in 2 minutes. Thank you. All right. Thank you, everybody, for hanging around during intermission. And we are now going to move on to the role of asylum, the darkest tale of the cover-up of the 20th century. Now, we're going to look at a couple places that I haven't actually looked at yet on the channel. So give me 1 second here to get these images up. And what we're going to be looking at here, there are 2 locations we're going to look at that we haven't looked at before. And you may have seen these if you follow urban exploration, and I believe some other explorers may have covered them. We're going to start by looking at the Pilgrim Psychiatric Institute in Long Island, New York. So again, everything's all coming together. Repurposed palaces to give them a bad reputation. That's part of it, Sean. I think that's part of it. Here's what's really interesting, though, about the Pilgrim Psychiatric Center that we're looking at. It is stated to have been built from 1929 to 1931. And this is a massive compound. We're going to take a look at it here in a little bit. Ryan says Strong Island. Yes, yes, yes. Now, there's all kinds of legacies that are associated with this. And of course, we recall when we look at asylums, we think of the Kirkbride plan. We consider that these were probably reset compounds. Perhaps these were places built to survive the reset. And then after the reset, they were repurposed for very nefarious reasons. Well, there was also the continued use of them well into the 20th century. And what was really the intention behind them? Well, the Pilgrim Psychiatric Hospital, not necessarily called an asylum, is quite an intriguing compound. For example, we have another one of these very impressive water towers. Yes. Why does someone need to build such an impressive water tower, 1929 to 1931? Right at the start of the Great Depression, no less. And one of the recurring themes that you'll get from the state of New York with financing these two asylums that we're going to be looking at is a lack of funds. But somehow, for some reason, at the start of the Great Depression, they had all kinds of funds to build it in the first place, to include this very impressive and ludicrously ornate water tower. You also see structures such as this. Now, again, these are all brick structures still standing to this day with, design ornamentations and decorative elements around the windows. We even have portal windows. So what's really the story behind this place? It's very interesting. I mean, we would think, just going off the timeline, that this, and by the way, this Pilgrim Psychiatric Hospital is a massive compound. We're going to look at an aerial image in a second. We're just looking at several of the buildings to start off with. But why would anybody go to all this trouble to build a psychiatric hospital? And by the way, Pilgrim was known for having the most amount of patients, over 13,000. It quickly surpassed Milledgeville in Georgia as the largest asylum in the nation during the 20th century, at least in terms of official residents there. Now, granted, who knows what the actual numbers were. But how exactly do we reconcile this? How do we explain such an impressive and ornate water tower such as this just for a psychiatric hospital on Long Island? And you can still go visit these sites today. They're talking about, how shall we say, renovating this area. I mean, what's really the purpose behind this? If we don't have these little arches and these decorative brick motifs here in this water tower, how are people going to know it's a water tower? Oh, I even like how we have the slits in it too. I mean, is this water tower going to be under attack anytime soon? Now, granted, that's what they'll tell us if we saw something like this over in Europe. Well, it was built to survive all those nasty invasions that they have. I'm being facetious, but I mean, how exactly do you explain something like this? It's very difficult to. And then we even have older images of the water tower. So, such a wonderful, ornate structure, your impressive water tower, your 5-star water tower for your psychiatric hospital. Okay, and so here we have it. And this is when it was referred to as Pilgrim State Hospital, Long Island, New York. And this image is attributed to, looks like 1938. And don't you just love it when they write it on there? Correction, it's 1938. It's not 1939, 1937. What year is it? I don't know. I wasn't there when they took the picture. But I just grabbed this image because it shows you an idea of how large this compound really is. And so remember, they inform us they built this entire compound in 2 short years. Yes, 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 yes. Oh, there you go, Win. Yeah, I didn't see a clock. No, I guess I didn't need clocks on it. But let's just really take a look at what we have in this compound. So we have all these large structures here. Another large series of structures here. Remember, this is all one psychiatric hospital. Little structure over here. And then here we have the main buildings of the compound. So gigantic layouts of buildings here. These are the towers that you saw that appeared on the thumbnail for this exploration. Here's the impressive water tower. So all these structures that appear to have been made out of brick, hard material, in a 2-year short period of time. And this is from the 1930s. Oh, and, we've also got smokestacks here. And what the heck is this? An aqueduct, a rail line to a psychiatric hospital? Really? Now, again, I'm going to ask you what makes more sense. Was this purpose-built as a psychiatric hospital, or was this repurposed? Does this not seem like this is a gigantic reset compound? Some sort of survival compound that somebody built to survive a calamity? Because keep in mind, and you can even see it in this image, this is isolated from the other urban areas. But you could fit a lot of people here. And they did fit a lot of people in this compound in the 20th century. Not sure what to make of it, but quite an interesting image. Quite an extensive compound, isn't it? Yeah, there you go. 2 years impossible. You couldn't even do it now in 2 years. Heck, it probably would take you 20 just to get 1/4 of those buildings even laid out. So, yeah. KC933, experimentation compound. Once again, KC, you're leaning ahead. You're right. That's exactly where we're going with this. So yes, this is the Pilgrim Psychiatric Hospital. We've got some other odd images. And like I said, there's urban explorers that still go around and look at this compound frequently. So you can get an idea. The fact that it's still standing is a testament to its resiliency. And it was in operation for quite some time until a series of controversies brought it down. And I mean, isn't this so interesting? Just seeing all the infrastructure, all the dedication it took to bring about this compound. I mean, somebody built it, unless you want to accept the mainstream historical account that, yes, the state of New York decided to devote all this money and all this effort, and then they spent the next 4 decades underfunding every asylum that they had, or hospital, or whatever you want to call it. Such an interesting image here. I mean, is this like a cataloging image, an exploration image? Look at what wonderful condition this structure is in. Oh, I can't wait. I can't wait. Same thing with this one. Yes, that's going to be our old main building. That's what we'll call it. It just looks like an old main building. I can see it now. Or, maybe you could say this is going to be our Capitol building for something. No, it's not nearly ornate and nice enough. So, hospital it is. And then I just showed this image just to give you an idea of scale and all the bricks that go into this. So you have this individual. This is from some of those urban explorers. And yeah, you've got some other urban explorers that leave their mark there. But look at the pattern of bricks. I mean, it's very, very intriguing. And clearly this was bricked in by whoever originally built it, but why have this massive archway? Very, very strange. And even this, look at how absurd this is. You have these multiple layers of archways for what's supposed to be purpose-built as a psychiatric hospital, a state hospital. Really? You put all this effort into it? And remember, we're looking at the ruins of this. And, then we've got all the little arches up here and then all the little decorative elements. Why? Why would anybody bother with this? Now, if you were building this and you had superior building capability and you were on a constrained timeline, then does this structure make a little bit more sense? Again, I'm just floating the question out there. Now, I will mention we do have blueprints apparently for the structure. And yes, much like with all these other large compounds, there is a very extensive underground tunnel complex. So not only does the mainstream historical account tell us that we built all these structures in 2 years, we also built an incredible tunnel complex. Well, because why not? It was the start of the Great Depression. Anything could be done. Archways were as tall as needed. Exactly. Makes you wonder. What's absurd? People trying to tell the truth. Good point there, Sky Sage. And who could really do it now? Could you contact a contractor? And what would they say if, you were some state government even, and people say, well, governments have infinite funds. Well, according to the official historical account, the United States didn't have infinite funds. They had J.P. Morgan. That's who had the infinite funds, apparently. Yeah, I know, New West Reset, tunnels. Well, it just has to have tunnels. Otherwise, it wouldn't be complete without it. So anyway, that's the Pilgrim Psychiatric Hospital, originally the Pilgrim State Hospital. So let's take a look at the darker portion of this tale. And we're going to go to Willowbrook. Now, Willowbrook is not on Long Island. It's on Staten Island, if I'm saying it properly. New York locals let me know. And if not, feel free to make fun of me for my Midwest accent. Or my Southern accent, depends where I am from this particular exploration. The expose of Willowbrook State School, Geraldo Rivera. Ah, yes, that Geraldo. Believe it or not, he made a name for himself exposing Willowbrook State School in Staten Island. And guess what? Willowbrook wasn't built in the 1930s. It was stated to have been built right before World War II. Although good luck finding construction photos of either one of these impressive facilities that we've looked at. And what's interesting about Willowbrook is it's kind of the same thing. You have this massive compound. Now, the official history says that this massive compound, and by the way, this does not conform to the Kirkbride design plans. We don't have our big giant bat here, but we do have a very large structure and a series of structures. And Willowbrook, just like Pilgrim, is also connected by a series of tunnels underneath it. And in fact, we're going to get to the urban legend that rose in New York as a result of it, and also the terrifying tale of these asylums. But this was originally built as apparently a hospital. It was used as a hospital during World War II. And they built it at the start of World War II, when the United States wasn't building anything, because everything was about building that great American military machine to defeat the Axis powers, so the official history says. And then after World War II, it was repurposed. It was repurposed officially to house the developmentally disabled children of the entire state. And soon it overflowed with developmentally disabled children. I'm having difficulty speaking. But another massive compound. And there are many terrifying tales that come with Willowbrook. And here you can see images. The structures still stand and the tunnels still stand. And there's all kinds of crazy rumors about people that go and squat in the tunnels. There's rumors of satanic cults that operate in the area. Everything that you can imagine. Yeah, there you go, Brian. Asylum trains. Why not? Oh, we're getting to that, KC. We're getting to that. KC's again already leaning ahead. I think she knows all about Willowbrook and the vaccines. Yes. Yes, we're going there. So anyway, ostensibly developed as a hospital, repurposed to house developmentally disabled children afterwards. A very impressive compound with an immense layout to it. Again, all built out of brick. Now, you may recall, if you look at all the barracks that the United States Army rapidly constructed for World War II, they did not make them out of brick. They made them out of wood. And in some places, those wood buildings still stand, because guess what kind of wood they were made out of? But this is very much not a wood building, made out of brick. And you have the original Willowbrook special. This aired in the early 1970s when Geraldo Rivera called to attention the fact that decreasing funds had left the poor, unfortunate children, who, remember, were developmentally disabled and left there, neglected. In fact, they only had one caregiver per 30 to 40 children. Now, you can actually go and watch this special on YouTube, and you can see Geraldo at the beginning of his powers of sensational journalism. What's even more interesting, though, about Willowbrook is the fact that apparently this was an openly known problem in the state of New York, that they had all these poor kids crowded here. It had been this way for years. And in fact, in the previous decade, Robert F. Kennedy himself had called it a snake pit. But despite the fact that the great senator from New York was aware of the problem, nothing was done about it. And even after Geraldo's great expose, it was another decade and a half before they finally closed the place. So already all these problematic things happening in the middle of the 20th century. But just wait, this story gets darker and more disturbing. Now, you may recall that Robert Kennedy's younger sister, Rosemary Kennedy, ended up being the victim of a lobotomy herself, because her precocious ways and her rebellious attitude just did not fit well with her father. Now, you can find numerous justifications for how the Kennedy family were going to do what they were going to do to her. They were concerned that she was going to be kidnapped, apparently. And so because of that concern, they decided to have her have a full frontal lobotomy. And after doing that, she was housed in St. Coletta, one of our very first explorations on the channel. Coincidentally, St. Coletta is located near Jefferson, Wisconsin, about 30 miles away from that lovely observatory we just looked at. So once again, everything overlapping. And St. Coletta doesn't really make a lot of sense either. A massive structure built next to a town that's maximum population was 7,000 to house children with developmental disabilities, although this was at the behest of the wondrous sisters in the Franciscan order that is responsible for everything across Wisconsin. But that's where Rosemary Kennedy lived out her life after her unfortunate lobotomy. Now, going back to Willowbrook. Willowbrook, if you watch the Geraldo Rivera expose, he talks about all the problems. The kids are living in close conditions. They can't feed themselves. Most of them are naked in their own feces on the floor. He also shares another little tidbit. 100% of the population of Willowbrook is infected with hepatitis A and B. But he doesn't say how this happened. Enter Dr. Sal Krugman. Dr. Sal Krugman was a pediatrician and one of the early vaccine testers in the United States. Yes, in the 1950s and the 1960s, Mr. Krugman, here, let me make sure I reference the exact data for you, because I don't want to get this very disturbing story incorrect in any way, shape, or form. So Saul Krugman lived 1911 to 1995, and he did great discovery and work. And you notice that this is a trading card on the Vax Pack Hero trading cards. Yeah, I'm not making this up. This is real, and you can look this up. And during the 1950s and 60s, Krugman had numerous achievements, including distinguishing hepatitis A and B and discovering that heating blood containing hepatitis B would kill the virus. And he developed a vaccine. And that makes him a hero. Now, let's just ask that question. How did he go about doing these incredible achievements? Well, I will tell you. Apparently, Dr. Krugman decided to conduct a very disturbing thing that happens in the United States, unethical human experimentation. He intentionally infected the entire population, or eventually leading to the entire population of Willowbrook with hepatitis A. And apparently he did that by taking the feces of some kids and then infecting other kids with it and then studying them. So he did a non-consensual human guinea pig test. Yes, all the darkest things that occurred in the Axis nations happening in the United States. Now, you're probably wondering, what exactly happened to Dr. Krugman? Was he brought up on charges? Was his reputation destroyed? Oh, no, not at all. In fact, Dr. Krugman received an award, the Lasker Bloomberg Award for wonderful achievements in medical science. I don't remember exactly what it was for. I think it was some public service award. What an interesting public service award, too. And keep in mind, he received this award in the 1980s, well after everyone was well aware of what happened with this terrifying human guinea pig study that he did. Unethical human experimentation. But yeah, he received an award because he developed a vaccine. And to this day, you can see his trading card is still available. He's a VaxPack hero. He developed a vaccine. So I guess at the end of the day, that's telling you where our morality stands on unethical medical experimentation. It almost reminds me of the monster study. If you don't remember, the monster study was done by Wendell Johnson at the University of Iowa. Well, actually, the study was done in 1939 in the city of Davenport, Iowa. And Wendell Johnson was trying to determine why kids were stuttering, and he implemented a study. He had a lady named Mary Tudor, one of his graduate students, actually conduct the study. And what they did was they tormented several kids, again, without consent, and they dubbed it the monster study. By the way, the results of the study were never published, and yet at that time, it was an open secret in the University of Iowa for decades to follow, but nobody really had any problem with it. It wasn't until the 2000s that finally an investigative journalist, kind of like Geraldo, came back and exposed all this. And then the state of Iowa actually ordered reparations paid to the, I think it was maybe 3 or 4 surviving members of this monster study, because you had kids whose lives were terribly affected by this study that was done. But to this day, even in the public apology, they say, don't blame Dr. Johnson. It wasn't his fault. He was trying to help the kids. His intentions were good. I guess Dr. Krugman's intentions were good. I guess what Dr. Krugman was doing was the right thing. Now, let's be honest here. If any other nation had done this, especially a, how shall we say, adversary nation of the United States, we know exactly how this action would be regarded and what would happen afterwards. But since this happened within the United States, this is the act of a hero, an individual who received a public service award. Yes, that's exactly what happened. That is the legacy of Willowbrook. It's almost like everyone's just embracing the philosophy of Dr. Hans Reinhardt from the 1979 film The Black Hole. And if you don't recall that film, that was the ship captain that lobotomized his own crew to go through the black hole. Yes. And as he famously said in the film, the ends justified the means. Coincidentally, he was portrayed by Austrian actor and is no longer with us to this day, Maximilian Schell. Yeah, you see where the sentiments of the United States were. This film was made in 1979, by the way. So is that really the way it is? Is that really what we have? The ends justify the means? Now, in the late 2000s, there was a film made about the urban legend of Cropsey. And for those of you who haven't heard the urban legend of Cropsey or aren't from New York, and it does have a lot of notoriety to it, and there's actually been a couple movies made about the urban legend of Cropsey. Cropsey is an individual who hunts kids at night. And there are different origins to the tale. Some say that he's an escaped mental patient who lives in the tunnels of Willowbrook and he preys on children. Others say that he was burned in a camp accident and as a result, he preys on children. Anyways, oh, hey, I'm Kairos. I'm sorry, I didn't say hello. Oh, yeah. That's very, very sad and yet true because guess what? It's everywhere. And I'm not meaning to pick on New York. It's just that New York here is the most well-known. There's a reason why I inserted that reference to Iowa, because the unfortunate truth is this happens everywhere. But anyway, back to Cropsey. So they did this movie, these two filmmakers, and you can watch this on, I think it's on Amazon right now. It's called Cropsey. And they talk about the legend of Cropsey, and then they talk about the real life individual that Cropsey is based upon. And that's the individual known as Andre Rand. Andre Rand is a convicted kidnapper and killer. He is believed to be responsible for the death of 6 children, and he was convicted or has 2 known victims of 2 children. Now, where it's really interesting and disturbing is that Andre Rand's mother was committed to Pilgrim, that hospital we looked at first. And then Andre Rand visited her. Now, apparently during this film, they interviewed his sister, and she said that they were not abused as kids, that they had a more or less loving family, but his mother was confined to Pilgrim. Well, it gets even more interesting when Andre Rand himself served as an orderly at Willowbrook in the 1960s. And that was when the worst things were happening. And then after that, apparently Andre Rand developed some sort of psychological aberration as a result of these horrors. And then he began either kidnapping and killing kids, and that's what he was convicted for. And if you watch the film Cropsey, everything revolves around the legend of Cropsey. And then they say that pretty much Andre Rand must have inspired Cropsey. Now, yes, killing kids is a very terrifying thing. But apparently doing medical experimentation on kids is not so terrifying. It's really strange and really bizarre when you step back and you try to justify the morality behind all this and the ethical mentality. Now, what the film Cropsey revolves around is just, well, Andre Rand is clearly the inspiration for Cropsey. They're never going to say that the doctor was in any way responsible for this. And they're certainly not going to say that the government or those that ran these institutions were responsible. It's just a bunch of victims. That's all it is. You know, the government just didn't have enough money to facilitate it, and it led to this unfortunate condition. But they caught this guy. What's even more strange is that while there's rumors that he worked with many people, we don't have any names of any of the other perpetrators or anybody else he worked with. It's just really a rumor, or either that or they kept it secret in the court. Who knows? It's just very, very strange. It's very disturbing. Was Cropsey a real individual, or is it just an urban legend? I don't know. Now, there was a film made in 1981 called The Burning. That is a film that takes the burned camp counselor. No, wait, he was a caretaker, if I remember the film properly, who got burned by some kids playing a prank. And then he goes to a camp after the hospital can't help him. How ironic. And he decides to take his vengeance out on the kids. It's called The Burning. It came out in 1981. This story gets even darker, as if it's not already dark enough, when you look at who was responsible for the making of this film. Now, if you're interested, look it up on your own. I'm not going to mention this individual's name right now because I'm already pushing it by mentioning the good doctor. So yes, all these things happening with asylums in the 20th century. We have human experimentation. We have underfunding. We have kids neglected and left. And yeah, Adam, this was even before Nightmare on Elm Street had come out. That was a couple years later. But you can see what the incipience of all that was, can't you? And yet all of this all revolving around and coming out in this particular way. That even though we thought asylums were a thing of the 1800s, they were still used extensively in the 20th century. Or, again, is it another cover-up? Was this always the role of the asylum? Was this always the purpose, to do these kind of horrifying experiments? It didn't really end in the 1800s, did it? It continued deep into the 20th century. And by the way, Willowbrook was not closed until the 1980s, and I think Pilgrim lasted just as long. So very, very, very disturbing. Yeah, it sounds like quite a cover-up, doesn't it? And this sounds like one of the biggest cover-ups. Now, you can certainly watch these films. You can watch Cropsey. You can watch The Burning. You can understand the urban legend of Cropsey. And in the eponymous film Cropsey, the two filmmakers say, well, we believe that it was just a legend to prevent us from exploring the Willowbrook grounds because it's still there and kids still explore the tunnels. I mean, why wouldn't they? It sounds like a lot of fun, doesn't it? So anyway, yes, that is what we have. So this entire cover-up that goes to why we have no reference to Tartaria or a recent lost civilization. And you're probably asking, well, how exactly did that happen? Why is it nobody ever said anything about it in the 20th century? What did they really say when it came to previous civilizations? Well, I'm just going to show you because I'm in one of my feisty moods, and here's how you could refer to it. In the 20th century, this book came out, Fingerprints of the Gods by Graham Hancock. In the mid-1990s, The Evidence of Earth's Lost Civilization. Now, I'm just going to flat out say this exactly as I see it. What you have here is the acceptable way to refer to an old civilization. And that's the whole thing. It's an old civilization. It happened tens of thousands of years ago. It is certainly not a recent civilization. And a lot of people read this book. I read this book too, Nana. And this was actually when I was quote unquote an official historian. And there was actually probably about 50% of it that was accepted by the mainstream at that time. No shots fired, Griff's report. I'm just recollecting what happened. Now, it was considered acceptable, and it is still acceptable to talk about that. But what's very, very interesting is it's not ever acceptable to talk about a more recent lost civilization because we know exactly what happened. So, hey, Angel, well, thanks for joining us. Good to see you. And so because of that, that's why we seem to have another version of this cover-up, if you will. Yes, there was an ancient civilization, but it was a long, long time ago. You can talk about that till you're blue in the face. And in the 1900s, the 20th century, I'll tell you what we called it. We called it Atlantis. That's exactly what it was. And now what you'll see is that Graham Hancock is kind of the ultimate mainstream media straw man. He's the guy who's considered the pseudo-historian, the pseudo-archaeologist, the pseudo-this and the pseudo-that. And you shouldn't be thinking like Graham Hancock. And of course, we know what the intention behind this is, and we know what it's really doing, don't we? It's a really good book. Just make sure you read it, right? But the whole point being, there's another cover-up. There is no recent lost civilization. If there was, it was in the distant past. And don't worry, the official historians told you that Graham Hancock is a pseudo-historian, a pseudo-archaeologist. He has no idea what he's talking about. Of course, if you look in the numerous papers from the day, you'll find that there were all kinds of references to Atlantis and finding an ancient civilization. So again, the media, because remember, the media are the authorized publishers of conspiracy theories. Remember, they're not bona fide conspiracies. They are conspiracy theories because journalists are not historians or scientists. But you saw articles like this all the time, especially from that time frame, talking about all these incredible, amazing different things. You know, now the media keeps it much more limited to our political conflicts and what's going on here and there and who's spewing what at who and, you know, who's thumbing their nose up about this and that and how the fate of the free world hangs on somebody flipping a coin, so on and so forth. Oh, by the way, I just thought I'd mention this. While the symbol of the griffin is associated with Tartaria, and by the way, Tartaria is a placeholder name. Yes, it's on the maps, and no, it doesn't make any sense. But who knows what the civilization was actually called? This hypothetical civilization that may or may not have existed. I do find it funny, though, that they say that there was a flag. Let's be honest. There was never any sort of flag with Tartaria. Why would anybody need a flag when you could just build things like this on your buildings? Yes, this is the Plummer Building in Rochester, Minnesota, that's adorned with many, many griffins. And yes, I know it's not the best high-definition image, but like I said, I'm already pushing matters in this live stream. Yes, this wonderful old world building that's in the middle of the Mayo compound and surrounded by lovely modern glass and tower buildings. And this is attributed to the 1920s. And you may recall this building has an unbelievably exquisite interior. And so, when taken in totality, what you have is everything pointing to a massive cover-up. Now, are we really to believe this structure was built to be the central headquarters structure of the Mayo Clinic in the 1920s in Rochester, Minnesota? Rochester, Minnesota, which still doesn't have the interstate going right by it. You still have to drive a little ways off of I-90 if you're going to it. And yet, here this building stands, surrounded by glass towers, but it's still there, with the symbols of the United States and the Mayo Clinic from the 1920s, the griffin. I mean, there are thousands of griffins on this building. It's very, very interesting. Yeah, as I Am Cairo says, extreme decor. And there you have it. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this exploration. And really what I wanted to do was take an overall look at how things progressed through the 1900s to really complete the cover-up of what had happened before, to really bury the account of a lost civilization. What are the methods that were done to do it? Controlling history, given a different history, given a different account, having overlaying accounts when people start to question things. Because remember, in the latter part of the 1900s of the 20th century, people were allowed to question things to an extent. And remember, one of the most popular sci-fi series was The X-Files. But since we've entered this century, that's all been walked back quite a bit. You are not to question things. There is right and there is wrong and there is nothing in between. And that seems to be the way things are. And ultimately, I don't know. I don't know if there was a previous civilization. There's a heck of a lot of evidence, and there's a heck of a lot of coincidence with how people try to cover up things. And it seems to be that there are two explanations given for why you shouldn't question or concern yourself with things. There's going to be another reset very soon, so don't worry about it. Okay, maybe so, but you know what? If it's going to happen, it's going to happen. You may as well try to answer some questions. Or it's just a little short time frame, and everything will be fine in a few years, and there's no reason to worry about it. And you know what? Maybe that's true too. But at the end of the day, it's up to you to decide what you believe and what accounts you want to accept. And I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm just here to present to you some other mentalities that might be helpful to embrace. Anyways, oh no, the war with words won't stop. And that's why it's just important maybe to think more objectively, even if it's the hardest thing to do. All right, well, before everybody departs, please be sure you hit that like button. And what is our next episode going to be? Well, I think it's time to take a look at something that I haven't gotten back into. We're going to go back into old world in film, and I previewed it briefly. We're going to look at some of the films of Canadian director David Cronenberg, because I've wanted to take a look at films like Scanners and one of my personal favorites, Videodrome, for a long time. And I figured doing it here on a live stream would be the best place to do it. So, anyways, please hit that like button before you go. And this is Lucius Aurelian, thanking you all for joining me. I hope you have a wonderful day, week, night, wherever you are in the land. And we'll see you on the next exploration. Take care.